Okay. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to A Little to the Left, an online space where we try to move conversations about sex, sexuality, gender, queerness on the left to the left. Today, to help me do that, I have an amazing panel of guests who are going to help deconstruct the myth that a lot of people have that queerness is a white thing. Whiteness is terrible. That's not a myth. Yeah, so there's a lot of, often you kind of hear these conversations maybe online or in different communities that being queer is a white thing, and it often erases the rich, queer history that many communities of color have. So I would love to invite my panelists to introduce yourselves to the audience and take it away, KingJon.
Yeah. How's everyone doing? I'm KingJon, and I'm a New Yorker, so I live in Brooklyn, New York City. And I am, of course, I'm a man of color, of course. So I tend to, in terms of where I sway, I am pansexual. So I tend to kind of just love everybody and love everything. So, yeah, that's kind of me. Yeah.
All right. I'm Sean or Yana. I am a trans man. I'm a person of color as well. I'm Indigenous, mixed Indigenous with some Cherokee, Potawatomi of the Anishinaabe Nation, as well as some Taino, Nahuatl, and Quechua. I stream on Anarchist Laboratory on Twitch with my co-host Kevin. I am also part of the Edna Griffin Club of Central Iowa, located in the metro area. And the things that I do kind of for the club is I actually started last year, was my first year on my food sovereignty project. It's just right out of my apartment. Nothing too big. It's pretty much just for my apartment complex for right now. Looking to get some other contacts if possible. And just as a fun little thing, January 25th will be my third year on testosterone, a week after my birthday. So that'll be dope.
My name is Green or RC. I am Metsi, hailing originally out from Treaty 1 territory, which is, for those who don't know, Canada. That's Saskatchewan, Saskatoon area. Though I currently live up in the I'm just going to read this. I currently live up on the historic territories of the Mississauga of New Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee and the Wendat people, otherwise known as One Dish, One Spoon, or Toronto. I'm a local. I don't want to say community organizer because I think it's overstating it, but I do work within the queer and polyamorous community of the city. I identify as gender fluid and fall under the sort of trans umbrella. You can see the trans flag there. And I go by they, them.
Nice.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. I'm really excited to hear you have this conversation. Before we get into the main topic, do you want to let everyone know your queer journey? So, your path to getting to your current sexual or gender identity?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll be 30 in January. I actually didn't come out as trans until I was 25. I was born in 92, so, anyone else that's a millennial, you kind of understand, like, we didn't really have the vocabulary growing up until maybe, we were in our teens with, like, shows like I Am Jazz, shows like that where trans identity really started to get presented to people, en masse. on mainstream media, on your major cable channels. But prior to that, I call it, I LARPed for 25 years as a cis hetero woman. I around 23 started getting just severe, my depression got so severe that, I was basically holed up in my room 24 hours a day, didn't talk to anybody, didn't interact with anyone. It was, not great. And then finally, I kind of figured out after, kind of looking around on the internet, finding different trans creators and, Blair White, unfortunately, other trans creators like Riley, people like that. I finally kind of figured out, what the problem was. And the problem was that I had never been comfortable or never felt like myself, almost like a third person game where you're controlling an avatar of yourself, but you have that sort of game character disconnect where you don't feel like it's you. And finally, I came out to my mom, all my friends, and my mom's been great about it. She uses, Sean as opposed to my dead name. She uses my name. She uses he, him, introduces me as her son. Very supportive mom. And that's basically, what my queer journey has been as far as my sexuality. Also, like I said, I LARPed for 25 years as a cis hetero woman, so it took a while to figure out I kind of like everybody. I just, I'm not picky.
I am a late in life pansexual queer, so I can relate. KingJon, go ahead.
Yeah. My experience sort of started I would say, in college for me. That's when I started knowing like what I possibly kind of am at that point in terms of like my identity. And I think for me, it was just realizing and just looking around and just being like, you know what? I think I like other people. I was also LARPing as like a cis heterosexual man too. But then I looked and I was just like, hey, I think I also like men also, and I like other different people. And that just started snowballing, and then I just kind of accepted it, like who I was at a point, like at least when I was like 25. And then other than that, like everyone around, in terms of my experience with other people, like everyone was pretty accepting about who I was. Parents didn't really care. People in my block, I didn't really care. I mean, dudes in my neighborhood didn't really care. They just, they just figured out, and they're just like, oh yeah, I had a feeling, and just like, oh, you knew, and it's like, yeah.
Don't you hate that they steal your thunder? You come out, you're like, yeah, we know.
I've definitely done that to people. So,
and also this kind of like for me, this spells like the stereotype that like I know a lot of people have this thing like, the Black community is more homophobic than other places. And for me, it's like, hey, man, I was in like the hood in the Bronx, and I told these guys where I was, and they were like, yep, we're cool with that, man. Like, we don't care. Like, this is not our concern. Like, we don't really care. And yeah, that's kind of was sort of my journey, because I mean, I think I told Nix this about like my life in like college. College is like a very complicated area for me, and it was just weird. So yeah, so that sort of came to my realization there about who I was, and I was just like, yep, this is who I am, and I'm totally fine with it. And yeah, so yeah, it's kind of my journey.
How about you, Green?
Well, I think my journey's not entirely over yet, although I guess no one's really is. So I'm a little bit older than I think the rest of you. I don't know. Like I'm pushing 40. Like I'll be 40 in about 6 months.
Yeah, I'm going to be 30 in a month.
Yeah,
you're a bit older.
Yeah, I'm like 28, so I'm a young one.
So, like, I'm not even fully out. Like, my work does not know my pronouns. Like, my work even had we even recently had like a big like thing on respecting pronouns at my work, and I'm like, nope, not doing that. I do not trust any of you people with my pronouns. So yeah, but I also didn't like. I feel like I knew who I was very, very young, and I don't feel like there was a lot of like need for self-discovery. What there has been is a lot of confidence in, or a lot of like building up confidence in how I portray myself to the world. I used to present like, so you can see now I present very mask. I used to present much more femme. Even spoke with a slightly more effeminate intonation in my voice. But I stopped doing that just because of the street harassment. Because I got lots of it on streets of Toronto, which everyone thinks Toronto is this like big, like like big, like really tolerant city. It's just another North American city.
Same old settler shit.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. So, like I said, most of my family knows. All of my friends know. Like if I don't trust you with my pronouns, I'm just not going to associate with you. But unfortunately, you don't have the option to associate with your coworkers. And while I think the vast majority of them would be chill, just enough of them wouldn't be that I'm just like, I don't want to deal with this. And that's not even getting into customers.
Oh man.
Oh,
so that's, although I work on operations, I don't deal with customers still. Just not gonna bother about it. But yeah, like I've been out. So that's still with gender. Sexuality, I've been out since. Sexuality is a different story. My sexuality is very open. Pretty much everyone knows about it. I've been out as bisexual since like 2005. That one my coworkers know. I date men, women. Mostly I date non-binary people. Mostly I date a lot of times I've dated non-binary people without knowing that they're non-binary. I've had it happen multiple times where like after like a year after we break up, an ex will be like, yeah, I'm non-binary now. It's like, so like, yeah, not shocked. You dated me.
Well, thank you, everyone. So let's get into it. Let's get into the main topic.
okay.
Is queerness a white thing? What do we think?
Emphatic no.
No, it's not.
Emphatic no.
There is a part of me that wants to just ironically be devil's advocate and say yes, but I'm not going to do that. Of course not. It's ridiculous.
Well, I think we could talk about the way it's been constructed in the media and then in the mainstream to be a white thing. That could be interesting. But yeah, let's talk about why you don't think that it is.
Well, I think before you can really do that, you have to look at the history of queerness. And obviously, like, I'm going to shout out a couple of authors here. One book that I'm currently reading, I'm not done with it yet, but I'm currently reading it, is As We Have Always Done by Leanne Simpson. I believe she's Ojibwe. And An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. The second one, content warning right up top. I do recommend it, but it will make you angry. There's a lot of it never gets better. It's a lot of dark stuff in there.
I have not read it, but it's on my wish list.
It'll make you mad. It'll make you mad, but it's a good book. I absolutely recommend it if you have if you're in the right headspace. I do recommend it. But so you have to kind of break down the history of queerness, and coming from an Indigenous perspective, queerness has always just kind of been around. Like, yeah, we might not have had the specific vocabulary for it, but it's always just been a fundamental part of, Indigenous history, whether you're talking about the Incan Empire, specifically like the Quechua. I mean, go look at their pottery. It's just guys being dudes the entire time. It's super gay. It is. It's just dudes being guys. They had a specific term actually, and I might be butchering this, but I'll try to pronounce it as best I can. Kariwarmi, which basically translates kind of loosely to man-woman. It's that sort of third gender idea where, you're not neither, a masculine person or a feminine person. You're just kind of sitting in between. And this is thousands of years ago that they had this. This was just sort of a thing that they had. And as we've always done, Leanne Simpson talks about, the openness of gender, the openness of sexuality within the Anishinaabe, more specifically within the Ojibwe population. There's always just kind of been that openness there. So you have this history, this long-standing history of queerness within Indigenous populations, and it doesn't really, there was never really a problem with it. You don't start seeing that construction of what we would conceive of as specifically colonial queerness until we start seeing the settlers and the colonizers interacting with us, where they would outlaw, they would literally criminalize things like same-sex marriage or just same-sex, coupling, polycules. They would straight up outlawed, anybody that was transgender, anybody that fell under the non-binary umbrella. All of that was criminalized for us for a very long time. And you saw this as well with, the Black populations. This happens, and you can see it still today in going on in Africa. We've exported, the US and Canada has exported evangelicalism to Africa in order to crush their own culture.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought that up. That's really a big one there.
Yeah. And it actually, it's an older movie, or it's an older documentary, but it is a good one. God Loves Uganda kind of actually explores this. It briefly touches on like the impact that evangelicalism, specifically American evangelicalism, has had on the culture and the spirituality of Uganda and the rest of Africa as well. You start seeing those kinds of things with the settlers, and this sort of push to whiten queerness, I guess. That's just the way of settler. That's just the way of whiteness, right? That's just the way of capitalism and whiteness. It works to bring everything into the fold and then discard anything that doesn't fit within the white hierarchy. That's how it works. So it'll basically commodify, it'll profitize things like queerness, things like, different gender expressions. It'll work to bring those aspects in by themselves and then cut loose the non-white part of it. It's fine if under whiteness, it's fine if you're white and gay or white and trans, but the second you're Black or Indigenous or Latin American or Asian or Middle Eastern, the second you're non-white and gay or trans, then there's a problem. So I think that has a lot to do with this sort of idea that, being queer is a white thing. Being queer is a white thing because of this commodification, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really what it is. Yeah. And in terms of like my background, from my father's side, I'm Haitian. So I know there's a lot of like really deep-seated, like basically internalized, basically colonization going on with Haiti, because primarily Haiti's mostly like a Catholic country, but there's there's this sort of demonization of like voodoo, and voodoo has a lot of history in terms of like it being very queer. I mean, basically, there is a god that is worshipped in voodoo called Baron Samedi, who's basically gender fluid. Basically, this being can be anyone. Or even in African, mythology, if you're talking about Yoruba, you got Oya, who's basically can appear in multiple genders. It doesn't really matter what the deity's form is. It can just appear, one day it's a man, one day it's a woman. It doesn't really care. So, we have these things in these cultures, and, there's this sort of demonization of things that happen over time with, colonization that sort of criminalizes these things and says, these things are wrong, or, sort of this sort of white cis heteropatriarchal sort of dominance framework over it. And yeah, it plays a lot into like the history of if I'm talking about Africa, I mean, this plays a lot to like, for example, like in ancient Egypt, there's a place called in Siwa that was, I mean, this is why it was funny when someone like what's his name? Scalia, whatever his, may he burn in the eternal fire. I don't know. Like Scalia said something like, "Oh, there's no such thing. There was never a thing called like gay marriage ever in the history of like the planet before." Like, yeah, and then it's like, no, there was. I mean, it was. If you've been to Egypt and Siwa, there were people who were married under Egyptian religion who were of the same. Like, they're buried together. We have proof. Like, they're literally buried. Yeah. Together.
But they were just really good friends.
Yeah, exactly.
So, if I may go back to voodoo for 1 second.
Yeah, totally.
Now, I may be mistaken, but I believe voodoo Urzuli is like a law specifically dedicated to love and homosexuality.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, that's about right. Mm-hmm. You kind of nailed it there. You're good. Yeah. I mean, this thing is like, and it's interesting because like in Haitian culture, there's like a sort of like demonization of voodoo where it's like, oh, this is a bad thing, and it's like, no, this is our thing. It's what we had. This is the religion that we made to connect to. Right. This is like a population that were taken as slaves who came from West Africa that brought their religious traditions and basically transformed it into something else. Because it's still the same. I mean, it's still the same deities. I mean, there are some areas in like the Dominican Republic where they know about like deities like Shango, and it's like, how do they know about Shango? Yeah, they know about Shango because that's where a lot of African slaves were, who were part of the Yoruba tribe, and they worship Shango, and they know about these deities. So it's like we transform these things to sort of, in a way, I always saw voodoo as like the slave population's attempt to sort of rebel against like the colonization of their culture. It was almost like them saying like, you're forcing us into Christianity, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to create our own thing because you're trying to make us become this thing that we're not. And then that's where voodoo sort of sprang out of. And the demonization that came later, it's just, it's kind of
right.
People know the history about it after a while. So it's just interesting to me, like the really big like queer history about voodoo that people really forget about, like how really deep it is in that sense.
And I think that you're kind of touching on something that's not really thought about, and that's the sort of spirituality that and to be clear, when I'm saying indigenous in this context, I'm meaning not just indigenous to what we colloquially refer to as Turtle Island, but also, Abya Yala or Latin America, as well as, Africa, the Middle East, all of these other places, global indigeneity. This sort of spirituality that is kind of connected to queerness. Like I'd mentioned, man, woman in, Kariwarmi in Quechua, but also in that exact same culture or that exact same population of people. And I wish I could remember the name of the spirit, but I don't off the top of my head. Suffice to say, it's a dual gender jaguar spirit. Now that's metal as fuck. That's hardcore. A dual gender jaguar spirit. Like, and, I don't personally identify myself as Two-Spirit, but I do understand that there are a lot of Indigenous people that use the title of Two-Spirit, and that is really just more of a colloquial thing that we use. The Two-Spirit has always existed in one form or another, whether it was called Two-Spirit in one place, it was called something else in another place.
Yeah.
That has always been there, and there's always this sort of spiritual underpinning to that. And I don't think a lot of people really examine that. You know, just the same as voodoo. Excuse me. The same with, voodoo. There's that sort of spiritual element to that sort of reverence or respect for those people that has been lost with the imperialist invasion.
Well, the term Two-Spirit is relatively recent, but it really, what it is an attempt to do is, I also don't identify as Two-Spirit for various reasons, but the term came about as an attempt to like reconcile these disparate identities, because like not every nation has the same construct of what we would call in English queerness. Like not every nation has the same gender construct. So the term Two-Spirit sort of came about to like collapse in these broad structures of gender across hundreds of different nations to something digestible to settlers.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and right, and Green is right. What would be considered or what the idea of queerness would be within, their particular nation would not be the same in, the even within the Cherokee Nation, the Kituwa bands, it would not be the same in the Kituwa bands as it would be in the official Cherokee Nation out in Oklahoma, because of that divide, that geographical divide, and all the time that's passed, and all the cultural exchange between the accompanying nations out there in Oklahoma. Just between those two pieces of that larger nation, queerness would not be conceptualized in the same way. And you go back in history between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Choctaw people. Queerness between those two people would not be considered, or would not be imagined in the same way. So and again, Green is right on this when they say that Two-Spirit is really more of a colloquial thing than it is an exact statement. It's just something to kind of say, sort of, to differentiate between settler and non-settler, the concept of queerness.
Yeah.
Well, also like Indigenous, as Indigenous groups, so we have our gender constructions are different from settler gender constructions, and as such, our queerness looks different from settler, and as a result, it does require unique language. So that I think Two-Spirit was a term created to address that specific purpose.
I think
this is true in West Africa too. Yeah, this is true.
Does not shock me at all.
Yeah.
And like I also would not be shocked if like
excuse me,
the Caribbean also has like a similar need, because just totally different histories.
Yeah,
even like the construction of like gender in a way, or like this, we mentioned like gender roles or whatever. Like things were like the perception of like only women raise kids. I mean, that would kind of be sort of like an alien thing to think about in like some tribal groups in West Africa. Not to say that there didn't have any patriarchal tribes in Africa, but there were some that didn't really believe in the concept, and they they believed in both people having an interest in raising the child or the village, basically. So it was mostly like a village raise the kid type thing. So everyone around you knew everyone was. So it's just
Mhm.
it is in that sense similar to what
Mhm.
Green is saying. It is very similar.
So if you talk about like child rearing in much of Medsea culture. So for those, I imagine most Americans watching probably know nothing about the Medsea because we have a unique history and a unique legal designation in Canada. We are the product of before Canada was Canada. When France was sending voyageurs in to buy up to buy sort of fur to trade in Europe. The Hudson Bay Company also paid for a lot of those furs. They sent like voyageurs into Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Western Canada, the Central Core, and a lot of those. These were all Europeans, but as time went on, those Europeans started intermixing with local native population, especially Cree Ojibwa. They came up with a wholly unique culture, separate from Indigenous, from like Cree Ojibwa and local Indigenous groups, separate from Europeans. We had and that is basically the Coles Notes version of where the Medsea come from. So we're recognized legally as Indigenous in Canada, but we are distinct from First Nations. We don't have the same treaty rights that First Nations do. And for just and this is so, but we're also like a hunter culture. And so when we talk about child rearing, like we would spend like half the year, quarter of the year on massive buffalo hunts, and the whole family came along for that. Like
fun for the whole family.
We might be sedentary for part of the year, but when the buffalo hunt got started, like your kid, your wife, everyone's coming along for that. That was a like, and there were gendered activities within the buffalo hunt. Like it was usually the men's responsibility to actually hunt the buffalo, and it was usually women's responsibility to like prep the carcass once it was killed. But everyone regardless of the role or regardless of the gender had a role within the hunt.
Mm-hmm. And I think that you're bringing up kind of an interesting point as well, Green, in terms of the how each nation would conceptualize gender. And what I mean is, and again, I'm going to refer back to the book As We Have Always Done, again by Leanne Simpson. She talks about how she conceptualizes just the word que. And que is the word for woman, loosely translated.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that she kind of conceptualizes it based on her understanding and based on, what she's been taught by her elders and what they were taught by their elders and their elders, yada, 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 all the way back. The way that they kind of conceptualize it is not just, or it's such a stark contrast, it's such a juxtaposition with the way that we consider, or the way that we conceptualize woman in a Western settler context, where in this Western settler context, it's very binary. It's very biologically based. It's very, you have the secondary set, you have breasts, you have a high voice, you have wide hips, you have a uterus, a vagina, all these other things, where it's very based on that biology. Whereas the way that she explains it in her book, the idea of que extends beyond that. It's how that person exists and moves through the world and interacts with the people around them. So it's a very difficult concept to explain in English, because English is not really designed for these kinds of discussions, because it's just
it's not.
It's just very clunky with these things. But it's such a that that kind of sentiment can be extrapolated to a lot of other nations.
Mhm.
You know, whether it's Cherokee, whether it's, you know, Haudenosaunee, whether it's, you know, Shoshone, it doesn't matter. It can be extrapolated to basically the rest of the world. You know, they had completely different ideas of what does woman mean, what does man mean, and what do these things on, you know, outside of those two things mean? How do they interact with the rest of the world and the rest of their community? How do we reconcile these things? And that's kind of, I think, just something for people to keep in mind when you're thinking about queerness, because this is, you know, honestly, one of the first steps. This is like baby's first decolonization. What I'm talking about is basically just like the 101, the spark notes for the process of decolonizing your mind and decolonizing, you know, your life, your entire life.
Oh yeah, of course. I'm sorry. My cat is really, you know, being very annoying right now. I don't know if you're hearing his background noise.
I'm not hearing anything.
Okay, so he's just, yeah, because I was getting annoyed because he's like walking around and it's just like, I'm like, are you hungry? And I know when he does this, he's being a little, you know, agitated, but so I'm not giving him attention. But yeah, yeah, that's what you said. Yeah, that's totally. Yeah, I feel it's interesting to think about how much, you know, the language is so constructed too. Because I remember it's like people seem to forget like how like I know like English is sort of in terms of like Western, you know, culture where we are like or whatever you want. Yeah, the sort of framework it's seen as essentially the sort of lingua franca of communication, right? And I think the perception of English has that way. It misses a lot of things that just there are things you just can't translate through English. It's like it makes things like so binary, and it's just like some of these words don't mean what you think it means in the language it actually said. You know, it's not like how people would say it. You know, and I think there's a lot of languages that in terms of like, especially in certain European countries that have that sort of framework too, that have like a sort of kind of rigid way of distinguishing, but it's not all the time. Like I remember like I think someone was talking to me about like Old English and how certain names were kind of neutral names before they turned them into like, well, this is a gender specific name, meaning
Old English is wild. Like I've tried to read Old English, and it's a totally different language.
Yeah,
it's completely
Old
different.
English. Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up because Old English is arguably more fluid in terms of gender and sexuality than like modern English is.
But like it was I mean it was fluid in everything. You could just make up how things were spelled in Old English, which is that's how you have a language right there.
You could order like if you were to say the phrase a big black dog barked at me in Old English, as long as you have like your subject in the correct place, you could order the rest of the words around that in any fucking way you wanted to, and it would still be the exact same sentence. People knew exactly what you were saying to them.
But yeah, if I can get away from English specifically, but keep on the topic of language.
Yep.
Yeah.
So part of the colonial experiment in North America, and I am sure they did the same thing with in other countries. I have no data, but I'd be shocked if this wasn't the story across the world. Part of colonization was eliminating language.
Mm-hmm.
And when you like so the Métis historical language Michif, which is a blend of French, Ojibwa, and Cree, there's only like 800 people left in the whole world who speak it. I am not one of them. But part of the goal of eliminating language is one, to standardize everything so everyone just can communicate either. But there's also, because it's easier to run an empire if everyone speaks the same language. But also, you want to eliminate concepts because and concepts rest in the language. So if you want to create a binary in a people that don't have a binary, you have to change the language so that they then have it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was like a big part of forcing Indigenous peoples to speak English, was to force them to conceptually think in English and therefore eliminate all of their sort of cultural practices that are tied to the language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and language, my personal opinion on this, and I'm not fluent in Cherokee, but I am learning slowly.
I got a couple words in Michif, but like I couldn't have a conversation in it. The French part for me is very easy to get. I speak French, but oh boy, the Cree Ojibwa. A lot of my Métis friends are just like, just learn Cree.
Just learn Cree. It's easier. Well, and I think it's true, at least for a lot of nations that I've been researching. Getting in touch with Potawatomi, more the Anishinaabe side of my heritage and the Cherokee side. Language is integral to our cultures, at least in those two examples. Language has such a profound impact on the way that culture structures itself and the way that society carries itself. So, and when Green says, the destruction of these languages is kind of the first step, or one of the first steps that the colonial experiment took to destroy us, I cannot overstate how accurate that is and how profound of an impact that's had on Indigenous people in North America and South America as well. Castillo Spanish is more or less the official language down there. It's almost like there's no good way to explain this, but the best way to explain it is the word wado means thank you in Cherokee. That's not its actual translation. It's very similar to miigwech, which more or less means that's enough or it's enough.
Mm-hmm.
There is no real word for thank you in Cherokee. Wado, similar to miigwech, is just it's enough. And by tearing that language apart and by criminalizing those languages, it has essentially changed the meaning of those words. And thus that will impact how those cultures move forward and how those cultures structure themselves and how that society behaves now. That's the kind of impact that crushing these languages or changing these languages actually has on Indigenous people. And again, when I'm saying Indigenous, I don't just mean North America, South America. I mean the global Indigenous community.
We as Indigenous peoples are like for naming, we're in an awkward position.
Mm-hmm.
Because settlers chose to call us Indian. And that's a problem because there is an India.
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, so use term Indian. Which Indians are you referring to? Like American Indians, which is another term, or like actual people from India. So then it's like, okay, well, so the term Indian is a bad descriptor. So then, like, so what we use, okay, we'll just say Indigenous. But then it's like, but there are people who are Indigenous all over. There are people Indigenous in Africa. There are people Indigenous in Asia. So, like, the term Indigenous is really, like, it's what we use because it's the language we have.
Mm-hmm.
But it's too broad a term to describe just, like, people Indigenous to Turtle Island. So we don't... So... that's why I try to refer to myself but like it's clunky to just say like to refer to your nation, because like Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island do have some shared experience when it comes to colonialism. So so there are times where like I can't just use Métis, so I have to use Indigenous, but then like global Indigenous, or so just naming for Indigenous peoples is something that English has bungled so badly.
Yeah, and it is. It's impossible because, you know, I have to be very particular, and I have to preface like, am I talking about Indigenous, you know, Cherokee? Am I talking about Indigenous to just Turtle Island or Abya? Am I talking about global Indigenous? I have to preface these things because, as we've stated, English just is not designed for these things.
Oh, it is totally not. And really, this is funny because I think my brother told me the story about this, where he was talking about how, you know, because I think he was teaching a class in Israel, and he was just like, all right, because there was a couple of evangelical Christians in his classroom.
Oh, Lord.
And I think he was explaining to them, you know, the King James Bible, which is, you know, when white people decided to translate the Bible, he did that as a joke.
Oh, buddy.
And then you know, he told me like you can already see their eyes start to, you know,
that look of
lighten
death.
up. And he's just like, yeah, so you know, in the part in Genesis when it said God created man or woman, you do know in the original Hebrew it said the earth dweller, right? You know, he didn't. There was no gendered specific person. It just said the earth dweller. God created the earth dweller. You know, so another mistranslation of language.
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny. It's so funny because people don't realize, at least in America and Canada, people don't realize that, like, if you want to look at what the sect, the early Christianity, if you really want to know what that looked like or get an approximation of it, go read the apocryphal books. Read the apocryphal books, and also read the Poetic Edda. Like, yeah, it was more or less Christian propaganda, but it had elements of those indigenous to Scandinavia. It had those elements of indigenous beliefs and that spirituality kind of running through it, because he had to make it marketable to Scandinavians that were largely still pagan at the time.
Yeah.
Or read the Saxon Helliond. That is, you know, that predates the King James version of the Bible. It's kind of a closer look of how Christianity looked in Northern Europe, in Northern Germany, how it actually looked before King James, well, I should say his ghostwriters.
Yeah, ghostwriters.
Yeah, because we all know James didn't actually sit and write that book.
No, of course not.
He commissioned it, though, so he gets the credit.
True.
Or, you know, the Council of Nicaea, where they're just like, oh, we got to take stuff out of the... Oh, Mary Magdalene had a Bible? Get rid of it. You know, stuff like that.
Yeah. I could do... So, I could do an entire separate stream on just, like, unpacking the Bible and Christianity in the West. I do consider myself a Christian. Metsi are, because we are part European, like in a lot of ways we are culturally very similar to closer to Cree and Ojibwe, but we did keep Christianity largely. I mean, there are, when you get any mixed group, like it gets complicated, but most Metsi historically have been Christian. But I mean, that's residential schools changed a lot of feelings on the church since then. So I think like there's a lot of Metsi atheists now, but I still consider myself a Christian, even though like I'm not necessarily a believer, because I think religion is more than just belief. I think there's culture to it. It's a whole separate conversation. But
well, I could do
an entire stream on the Bible.
I would love to do that stream with you if you ever do that stream, because I could go for literally hours about that.
I was part of a Catholic parish that I was once part of a Catholic parish that taught the Apocrypha. That priest he got excommunicated. So I have a history there.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's cool. I wanted to sort of, because this kind of brings to the point of like, back we were talking about about queerness though. Like it feels, especially in the case of, this is bringing me up things about like Africa at the moment, where you have this sort of, it's like vehemently, it's like super like, it's like just has like violently homophobic, and it's kind of, in a way, when you look at it, it's like, because at the same time, it's like, this is the environment that a lot of these evangelical types, who, mostly white evangelicals half the time, who are usually from like, they all come from Texas for some reason, but these like mega and then they go over there, they go to Uganda, or some of them are even getting into Zimbabwe, which I'm like, what the hell? Like, yeah, they're starting to go to places like that, or there's other places, and you can see like it's almost like spiritual colonization in a way.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I see it.
It's almost. I would argue it's not almost. It definitely just is.
Definitely is. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they're going through, and then it's the same thing. Like it's a case of the Caribbean. It's almost like the same thing with like there's like a really, like, it's a really horrible stereotype, but it's a stereotype nonetheless that it doesn't ring true, but it's understandable why it's there. And it's because it's this idea that like Caribbean people have this sort of string of homophobia. And I think a lot of this has to do just exactly with the same thing too. Same thing with like Jamaica, where a lot of these anti-gay laws that were written were basically put by the British when they were in charge. And they still remained. And it's just like, and people, have told them, like, LGBTQ people in that, fighting for their rights over there, they're saying, these laws were put by the British. Like, you guys are still using laws. And, I know a couple friends over there who are, basically trying to, that are still, living in constant, like, not fear, but like, it's, you can go to jail over there if you are, so. In terms of like laws, like buggery laws that they call them, you can tell it's British. They invented this. Like they just put it there, and they just never got rid of it. It's the same thing you see it in places like in Nigeria, though it's starting to wind down a little bit, just a little bit, not by a much, but a little bit, and that's thanks to a lot of, effort and like activism of people down there.
Oh yeah, no.
A lot of that, and yeah.
So I think this like cuts to sort of the crux of the issue, which is that like when settlers, white European settlers, accuse any other group, absolutely any other group, of being more homophobic than they are, it's such fucking bullshit, because they exported it. Yeah.
And Nick and I were actually talking a little bit before we all kind of hopped in and started the stream. It's such a weird thing to see on the left, because I see it all the time. And I know Twitter is a cesspool, but I'm on Twitter. But
I live on Twitter. It's what gets me through the workday.
I can't count the number of times that on Twitter that I've seen someone that claims to be a leftist, no matter what their tendency is, whether it's communist, anarchist, whatever, and they will say the most racist, just anti-black, anti-indigenous things, like, oh, indigenous people are, more homophobic, or, Latin American people are more homophobic, or, black people are more homophobic. And it's like, you realize that A, that's not true, and B, the problems with homophobia that we have are because of your white ass.
Yeah.
This was exported,
Yeah.
I mean, not like, and honestly, even the term exporting it is putting it, soft selling it.
Yeah.
It was violently and aggressively forced upon pain of death.
Yeah.
And the wildest thing is, if you read, and I spent 10 years, studying European history during the Roman period, during the Roman age. The wildest thing about it is they exported it to themselves.
Yeah.
They did the same thing to themselves.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a better background to talk about this than I do, but like there was a period of like weird sort of self-colonization that Europe went through.
Yeah. So basically it was just, obviously, Romans for the most part are the major factor in European self-colonization, because, the Romans, and this is, different before the Romans adopted Catholicism, they were by and large, various different kinds of non-Christian pagan. So, they adopted Christianity, they came up with Catholicism, and the easiest way to get, because they, had stretched themselves thin along the Rhine, trying to beat back, the push. Basically, it wasn't even like necessarily an invasion, a proper invasion. It was more so a mixture of, raiding groups, just because people needed money or they wanted to get honor, as well as a mixture of basically asylum seekers. They were coming to the Roman frontier for asylum. And, they basically figured out, okay, well, the best way to convert these people from paganism is to impose, whether it's financial sanctions if they don't play ball, whether it's, outright slaughtering them if they don't play ball, was to use religion and to crush whatever indigenous culture they had. I mean, a perfect example of this is the Heruli clan I believe they're like Near East Europe. So like, excuse me, the area of like Ukraine, that kind of area. There is an excerpt in a book, and I cannot remember who the author was, but he was some old Christian monk or missionary, I should say. And he was talking about these people, and he's like, they have a practice where they engage in homosexual sex as a bonding mechanism between the foot soldiers and their mounted soldiers. And it'll be one mounted soldier with like a little group of foot soldiers protecting them. And they used, homosexual sex as a bonding mechanism. And, of course, with the self-colonization and, of course, the colonization of Ireland and Wales and Scotland and all these other places, just the British Isles in general, it just sucked all of that out and created this identity, or laid the foundation for this identity of whiteness, because whiteness works to strip all of those unique cultural aspects from people like the Thuringi or the Saxons or the Franks. It rips those cultural aspects out and then applies that blanket of whiteness. You are white now,
right? Because it's a tool of empire building.
Yeah.
Because, like, once again, it is easier to rule an empire if you have a shared identity.
Exactly.
Part of creating shared identity is to homogenize.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you see that, with Irish people, the Irish people, they weren't considered white for a long time. Neither were the Russians for a long time. They're still technically not considered white by some Americans. You saw that with the Italians, the Spanish, the Portuguese people.
Yeah.
Yes, they did colonize in South America. However, they were not considered white for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked a little bit about this in private chat. You weren't part of that because you came in later. So, like, the Métis are signed in that boat. We are like conditionally white, so long as we don't get too uppity. I think the biggest conflict in Métis history has been like our push for self-governance, because that's really what we want. We have a history of socialist thought of local organization and self-governance, and we want to maintain self-governance. We volunteered to join Canada, but we under the condition that we continued to govern ourselves. And Canada was like, nope, fuck that. We're sending the RCMP to kill your leaders now. And so like, also like not all Metsi are pale like me. Like their Metsi come in all shapes and colors because we're fundamentally, there are black Metsi, there are like POC Metsi. So not all Metsi like have like my white complexion. But like, so I benefit from like this proximity to whiteness where, you know, so long as I don't mention that I'm native, and like so long as I'm willing to go along with the group politic as opposed to like Metsi nationalist politic, I get to be white. I obviously don't play that game, but like it puts me in a similar position that the Irish were in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I mean, obviously I am conditionally white passing. I don't always pass as white. I don't always. There are people that will peg me for Indigenous instantly the second they see me.
I get the same thing. I get the same thing. Yeah. I have sort of like, I have this look where I get the benefit from white privilege, but I don't look so white that I don't get that I also don't get, you don't look native.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a common thing. You know, one of my very close friends, she is Chicasha. She's registered. Like, she has the plastic and everything. She is part of that nation. She votes with them. Yep. She does it, you know, the whole 9 yards. But she is like 4 shades whiter than me. Like red hair, blue eyes, all the bells and whistles. But like, the second she pulls out that plastic that shows I'm a registered Chicasha member, oh buddy, she is just treated terribly.
Yeah, I also have a citizenship card. That, I mean, there's a whole, this, leaving the confines of this conversation, but there is a whole thing to be said about like indigeneity as national identity as opposed to a racial identity. There's a whole conversation we had there, but that should probably be reserved for another time.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, to kind of, I guess, get us back on track, we got a little sidebarred, but that's okay. Yeah, it's just, people should not make the mistake of saying, oh, queerness, whether you're gay or, you know, polyamorous, or, you know, transgender, or, you know, just non-cis or non-hetero in general. People should not confuse that is a white thing. Has it been infiltrated? Yes. It's been infiltrated, for sure, by bad actors. I will grant that. But the history of queerness is as old as the human species. It's as old as us as human beings. From the second we figured out, hey, we can smash. We were smashing everyone and everything we could.
Yeah. I mean, to go back, and I doubt that this is a unique experience to the Metsi. I'm pretty sure that if you look at any colonized people, you'll find similar themes. But like, for the Metsi, sexuality was a huge justification for oppression, especially like historically, Metsi women have been like, were allowed to like sex, and like, we just didn't care because we were like, why the fuck would you?
Yeah.
So
Why?
Like, if you liked having sex, awesome, have sex. If you like we and like, same with homosexuality, like we have this long tradition of like, you know, not giving a shit. Like, and of course, when And for a long time that was fine. Like Canada didn't care. We were clients of the Hudson Bay Company. We kept making them money. Why the fuck would they care? But then when Canada decided that they wanted the West, when Canada decided that they wanted Manitoba, and they wanted Saskatchewan, suddenly Metsi promiscuity became a moral outrage.
Yeah.
And it became one of the many terms by which they justified colonization.
Mm-hmm. And it is this interconnected web of again, people should be careful not to think of these things in a vacuum. It wasn't just, oh, we're going to outlaw it because we think it's icky. No, it was outlawed because it's easier to outlaw it and to dispossess those people of workable, livable land.
Exactly.
By destroying their culture. And again, as we've always done, Leanne Simpson, she does talk about that. She talks about when the settlers wanted the land of the Ojibwe people in Canada, they would come in and outlaw these things and then take that land because it was easier.
I would also like to take a second to tie this back to Africa. This is perhaps hearsay on my part. I don't have the academic background to truly speak to this with authority, but it seems interesting to me that we're seeing a big push for criminalization and of Christianization of Africa. I mean, much of Africa is already Christian, has been for a long time, but we're seeing this big push for like Christian cultural mores in Africa, especially by the evangelical bloc, just as we are seeing a rise in like Canada has more mining operations in Africa than any other country. Like so we're seeing the West move in to exploit African territory just around the same time that we're seeing this sudden push for Christian moral norms in Africa. And I'm not an academic. I don't have the knowledge of African history to speak to this with any sort of authority, but I find that parallel hard to ignore.
It is a pattern. It is a pattern that is seen, and it's just you kind of wonder is it's just a way like to sort of just be like, well, we're just going to take your resources and we're just going to give you, this sort of, vile thing to just basically, attack your populations. It feels like it does feel a little bit like it is sort of like they're thinking about this and it's like something that's planned. But also I think some of it is because a lot of like white evangelicals are losing power in their own sort of home country, especially in the United States, and they see that influence dwindling, so they're just like, oh, we're just going to go to. It's highly cynical, but it's cynical. To think about it, it's just very horrible. But it's basically like, well, we can't export our homophobia here because we kind of lost. We haven't yet because we're going after trans kids.
Yeah.
But we're going to go to another place and just sort of exploit those cultures, and then it's
right. Well, and I mean, consider this. If you get the population that you're exporting these Western evangelical values to, if you can get that population to kill itself, who's left to fight back when you want to move in and build a gold mine or start a wheel drilling?
That's a thought.
Also, you normalize your own culture, right? So you're effectively priming them to do business with you.
Yeah.
The settler states are already active in Africa and have been for some time.
Oh yeah.
It's. I don't want to go on a soapbox for China. I'm not the biggest fan of China, at least not the biggest fan of the Chinese government. Chinese people are people. They're just like anyone else anywhere else. But I find it deeply amusing, I guess would be the right word, when white leftists go after China for being active in Africa while ignoring the fact that like there are far more Canadian, European, and American mines in Africa than China.
Yeah, and that's like why I don't talk about other countries like China. I try to avoid it.
Same.
Okay. There's like you can point out all these problems that you have with whomever, but also consider like what is your country doing?
Yeah, I'm happy to acknowledge that maybe China is doing perhaps some unethical things in Africa. I'm happy to acknowledge that, but like let's not focus on that. Let's look at the big picture and who's doing the real long-term damage.
Don't throw stones in glass houses.
Yeah, exactly.
Goes. Yeah. Yeah.
Or I've seen like you can go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No, or like I've seen like certain white leftists say things about usually it's on Twitter, but you have these like I don't know if anyone's seen this, but they have like these maps of like this is what a communist United States will look like, and it's
fuck that. Yeah.
I hate those
they basically
so much.
like indigenous people just magically disappear, and it's
settler colonialism, but make it communist.
Well, and it's like I told Nick. It's like I told Nick before we started. It's vestigial colonialism is what it is. It's like the tail of a human being. It's a vestigial part. It serves no real purpose anymore, but it's still there.
And even when they do acknowledge native peoples, like they just keep the reservation system.
Yeah.
That's the best you can hope for with these sort of colonial like communist maps.
Yeah. And I think that does obviously that brings up the topic of land back. Well, what is land back? Land back is not just give us back our home and up top, don't worry, white people. Europe doesn't want you back. You're stuck here. You're fine. Relax. You're not going anywhere.
Like the
we're not going to murder you.
That we're going to recreate the idea. I mean, we're well past queerness at this point, but that's fine. Let's just roll with it. The idea that like Black or Native people are going to create nation states, or rather, we're going to create ethno states, because of our nationalist sort of like Black nationalism, Metsi nationalism, and land back are not the same fucking thing as white nationalism.
Yeah.
You dipshit.
Well, and I mean, to even expand on land back, because it's not just, I want my house back. It's also, I want my culture back.
Yeah.
I want my language back. I want my queerness back.
I want Canada or the US or wherever to abide by the treaties of it signed 200 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's the crux of Indigenous nationalism, Black nationalism, is that autonomy and that sovereignty.
Yeah.
It's being able to just exist as an Indigenous queer person.
Yeah. I mean, this is like in one sense, like Indigenous people, although like I don't want to eliminate Indigenous Black people. There are definitely like Afro-Indigenous people.
Right.
And there's a vector of oppression there that I can't speak to, but also want to acknowledge that does exist.
Yeah.
But like Indigenous people, at least we have the treaties, or in Metsi case, treaty-like agreement. Legal term.
Treaty-like.
No,
diet treaties.
Treaty-like agreement is actually what it says on the Canada. Like that is actually what the Canadian courts have called the agreement with Métis nations.
Canada.
But like we at least have the treaty, so we can be like, here's the legal agreement, abide by it. Like black people, because of the nature of like slavery and black people don't even have the treaties to lean on. And I obviously cannot be the one to resolve or determine like what the path forward for black people is, obviously. But I think as Native people, we have to acknowledge that we at least have this base to start from, where black people don't even have that.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
in terms of this is a problem in terms of like for especially in the US for like African Americans, like we're just asking for like, hey, you're gonna give us, and I understand like some white leftists seem to not understand like the reparations talk, because it's not that we're saying like, it's not like black people are in America are saying like we need a specific, because there's this weird thing where people think like, oh, you want like that's like performing like special treatment for black people, and it's like, no, that's not what we're asking here. Like, we're not asking for special treatment. Or some people of some sort of sock dem persuasion will say something akin to like, well, if you give us like free healthcare or do that, that's akin to reparations. And it's just like, that's not what we're trying to say when we say reparations. That's not what we're trying to say. Not to say that those aren't good things, but that's not what we're saying.
Yeah.
And in terms of like what, this is an interesting conversation in that aspect for, a lot of African Americans in that case, because I do know in like black anarchist spaces, which I kind of sort of am in at times, we will sometimes talk about maybe us being like autonomous or having like autonomous zones or whatever. That's an option. In certain areas, and I'm like, yeah, that is a viable option, and or things of that framework. But yeah, I think that is for me, I would say like that would be a solution that I would kind of think about, to sort of like to sort of have the black community have like have their neighborhoods like be their own in terms of like having their autonomy.
Self-governance.
That's
like I said, that's the same thing we as the Métis Nation want. We want the abilities, like, ultimately I think every people should be able to determine their own future. And really I think that's what colonialism takes away more than anything, is takes away your future.
And I mean, as far as like where Indigenous and Black sovereignty intersects, and this is my own personal opinion, I don't see why. I mean, okay, so by and large, because of the slave trade, Black people are in the US or in North America by and large because they are kidnapped victims. Their ancestors are kidnapped victims. And you don't take a kidnapped victim in and then say, oh no, you don't have any say over moving forward. My point here is, I don't see why our Black relatives would not be part of the conversation of land back. And I honestly believe that Black people within the US have just as much a role to play in deciding the future of land back as any non-Black Native does.
I mean, because they're oh, go ahead.
No, please continue.
No, because because our ancestors were of Indigenous background. That was taken from us. We were basically put on a ship and brought here. I know some of us came from went to the US. I know some of us went to Brazil. Some went to Latin America. So we can't forget those people in like South America, Afro, Latino, Afro. But I think that's a really good point that Sean brought up. I think
I am a firm believer that not only like our Black ancestors, like you said that like your Black ancestors were Indigenous, but I would argue that all Black people, period, currently are Indigenous.
Yeah.
Like even if you're not a member of an Indigenous nation in North America, like even if you're not like what we'd call Afro-Native, you're all Black people are still Indigenous. You're displaced natives. Your natives have been forcibly displaced from your homeland.
Yeah.
By means of colonization. That
Right.
The being displaced does not take away the nativeness.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If so, then lots of native people aren't native anymore because lots of like we may still be on the same continent, but we're still displaced from our homelands.
Yeah, I didn't grow up on the res. I don't have the plastic. I do not meet blood quantum for any one particular nation. I'm displaced. I live in Iowa. This isn't where Cherokee people live.
I am a recognized citizen of my nation. I have the card. But I don't live on our historic territories anymore. I haven't since I was like 15.
Yeah. And Green is 100% right. Like, what you were saying is 100% right. And I absolutely agree. Like, the Black people within our borders or anywhere in the world, they are just displaced natives and they have just as much claim to land back as any, placed settled native does in, whether it's North America, South America, or even, China or wherever.
Yeah.
They have just as much claim.
As a white native, it's not for me to determine what that means for Black people.
Right.
I'm not qualified for that.
Yeah.
But certainly I would call any Black person Indigenous.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like if a population, of Black people wanted to set up an autonomous zone, right on. You do what you got to do to be sovereign and to govern yourself.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. That's the whole ethos of Land Back is self-determination of everyone. And that, of course, includes our pasty friends.
And that also includes like a lot of things that's happening with with white people talk about police abolition, because that's what we want. That's why we don't want cops in our neighborhoods, because a lot of Black people feel that they are part of a sort of colonization process with the cops in whether it's New York City, St. Louis, LA, some Black people feel like they are in a process of colonization. And that's why there's that sort of, it's interesting to see that sort of connection play with like how like you see that intersect with a lot of what's happening with Palestinians and Israel, where you see that interconnection of like Israeli military training cops, and then the cops doing the same tactics here to Black people.
Right.
And it's just that sort of like parallel sort of thing going on. It's like that parallel oppression going on. Where it's like, they're doing the same thing to us here, and it's a part of. It's like we are being colonized in our own areas.
Oh, for sure, 100%. Gentrification is an extension of colonization.
Yeah.
As an aside, so the Royal Canadian Mounted Police specifically exist to take Métis land. The RCMP was specifically formed to displace us from our land.
Yeah. And as another aside, fun fact for anyone that doesn't know, and again, you can read this in An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. She is Indigenous. I don't remember which nation, though. The Army, the American Army, was formalized out of Rangers, which were basically federally sanctioned scalp hunters. They were federally sanctioned scalpers in the United States. That is where the U.S. Army specifically comes from, is from the Rangers who brutally murdered us.
And the police come from slave hunters.
Yep.
And the thing with a little New York history here, but this is kind of the thing that happens with why a lot of the NYPD or the early New York City Police Department was like, this connects to like the whole whiteness thing, how, you know, Irish people sort of, oh, you guys are white now, because they sort of, because, you know, the Irish were under the same sort of framework in like the early 1800s. If you watch movies like Gangs of New York, you know what I mean by that. So you see that sort of framework, and they started recruiting Irish men to be police officers.
Yeah.
And to basically say, oh, now you're a part of whiteness now. Now you're going to patrol and, you know, harass your, you know, fellow other people, and now you have whiteness back now. And it's the same thing too. It's the same thing happened also with the Italians too. It's almost like a reversal. So it's whether it's like, there's a very interesting history of like New York City when it comes to like organized crime and like where that sort of framework happened, and then how that sort of shifted, because the Italians kind of went in New York City the same way the Irish did, where it's just like, we're going to give you Italians the same, you know, police positions as the Irish had 100 years prior that we did like in the 1830s. And yeah, it's very interesting. Very interesting history.
There is a weird bit, and like you see this with LGBT and with like Black and Native people now, where there's this weird thing where people, where the settler state and settler culture as large views and treats joining the police as like conditional for normalizing your identity. So we get so many pushback at No Cops at Pride. It's because like it's like they or it's like why there's like this idea of like, we need more X identity cops, right? The idea
no,
that
we
like,
don't.
the idea that like Native or Black or queer communities need more police so they can so that those identities are represented on like in the police force, and theoretically that will solve the problem of police brutality. And it doesn't. It never has.
Nope.
And it never will. But it's treated as a way of like legitimizing an identity or community through like mainstream settler community, or through the mainstream settler like thought. And I think that's interesting. And like, I also think that that's an important like part of being legitimate in settler colonialism is the ability to like suppress yourself or suppress your own communities to make yourself more palatable for the settler state.
Yeah, well, and to build off of that, exactly what you're saying, within whiteness, within queerness, in the context of settler colonialist culture, there is a hierarchy, and you can actually see this hierarchy in action. At the top, you have gay white men. Below them, you have, you know, sapphic white women, and then you have trans white people, and then non-binary white people, and then you get lower and lower and lower until you hit that bedrock, which is typically non-binary people of color is like the lowest rung in the social structure of the Western world.
Yeah.
It's also a construct of white supremacy to get all non-white people sort of squabbling among each other for second place. Why you see a lot of lateral violence, like you see a lot of anti-blackness in the Native community. I've definitely seen anti-nativeness in the Black community. I don't want to like speak to which one's worse because I don't want to play a game, but like, and then like you like, and then you see like, so you get this competition where every group is sort of like, no, we got to be second place. You are like, we're better than you, and it's just it solely exists to benefit white supremacy.
Yeah,
because if we're all squabbling for second place, no one being like, hey, why are they at top?
Right. And I don't know if any of you remember, Green, this might not have been news in Canada, but when Obama was still in office and that big push to get gay marriage recognized, a lot of white gay people were throwing trans people under the bus because that was what was in. That was how they got their position relative to whiteness.
Well, we definitely like. I mean, it wasn't tied to Obama because, well, we just didn't have him. We had a gay marriage long before that,
Mhm.
but I mean, not that long, but like a decade.
Yeah.
But you still see like white gays who happily throw trans people under the bus.
Yeah.
Like we're
Yeah.
seeing in Britain right now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Britain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Turf Island.
fortunately, like, I mean, we definitely have. There's definitely trans bashing in Toronto, but we don't seem to have the same anti-trans reactionary politics in at least Toronto as seems to be found in most of the US and in like all of Britain. But it's still here, like for sure. Like there's a reason, once again, like I presented far more femme
Mhm.
and stopped because of street harassment.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms
Yeah.
of like,
And
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was going to talk
well-
about like sort of like the black community. Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
this is
go
a big problem in terms of especially with like black trans women. This is a like because how many black trans women have been murdered, especially I know like in the city that I know that have been murdered. And
yeah, this is what the worst year on record for trans murders, and most of them have been black.
yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with violence within our own communities because it's mostly straight heterosexual black men who are murdering a lot of these black trans women. So, and I think this was like months ago where there was a person who murdered a black trans woman and said that they try to use the trans panic defense, which is, I don't know why the hell you would ever, like, that's just, ugh. But yeah, you try to use that as a defense. And that's how
it works a lot of the time.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that's a big problem within like especially like talking to like people in my like community, like black community. Yeah, that's a huge, and it's a conversation they are having within our community space at the moment, which is important to have because there is a lot of like really big issues with that. And you know, I know a couple of my friends who were harassed or almost like viciously like almost assaulted, and you know, thank goodness there were, you know, some friends of mine who were in like the Bronx who knew those people that were like, hey, what are you doing? And you know, trying to assault those people and, you know, trying to protect them and be like, what are you doing? Because this is a thing, it happens a lot. And it's in the street harassment, this is stuff I've witnessed. I have seen this a lot of the times with my friends being with them, and it's pretty, I won't say it is bad. It is very, very bad. And I kind of keep this conversation for me to be like, because this is a conversation that we're having within the black community ourselves. It's not like we're not ignoring this. Like, this is a big problem.
I think Chappelle, if it was being ignored, Chappelle forced the conversation.
Oh, indeed, Chappelle. Oh, yeah.
Maybe not the best way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speak to this issue at all because I genuinely just can't. It's so far removed from my experience. I'm not going to try. The only thing I could recommend is like anyone watching this is probably already familiar with Cat Black. Cat Black covered Chappelle, and like I strongly recommend going to watch her video on Dave Chappelle.
I was going to say too, I just watched Intellectual. I never know how to say it.
It's Intellectual. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, media. She did about a month ago. I just put a link in the description, but a really good video about Black femicide, where she kind of wove all these
I saw that video too.
Such a good video. Holy man, that's a good video. I like. Oh yeah, no. I watched it. I watched it the day it came out, and holy balls, this is a good video.
And Kat has gotten so much shit from transphobes, from racists, Like her entire career on YouTube or wherever she started has just been nothing but her getting dogpiled
For
the entire time.
For a long time, her and Zinnia Jones were the only two trans people I knew on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, so from what I can tell, in terms of like my experience locally, yeah, it's been pretty rough up here, especially some people I know like in the Bronx or whatnot. It's just it's intersection of a lot of things going on, like the black hyper masculinity going on into that. There's this joke that black women that say that black men are the white women of the black community. It's a joke that black women make about black women, but black men, and it's true because I ain't gonna lie about that. So because I know because I've dealt with like sort of like black manosphere types, and so yeah.
This is something I wanted to bring up earlier, and then we kind of got off the topic. But there seems to be like this concept of like white heterosexual maleness is the default norm. I don't know. I'm quote tweeting. That's not a quote. That's just the case. Yeah. But it's the default, and it's sort of like society. Like you're allowed to be one step removed from that in any direction. So you can be white, male, and gay. Cool. You can be like, but if you have any more than a single deviation from that, there's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Especially like those. Yeah, go ahead, Sean. Sorry, I've been talking a lot. Go ahead.
Oh, you're all right.
I see. I don't think you've been talking a lot at all. If anything, I feel I've over dominated this conversation.
Yeah. So for me, I've seen like this is like a common occurrence that I see where I've always said, this is just my personal opinion, like when, because I'm going to use like black slang terminology, people probably won't understand, but I've always said to myself that some of these, especially like the black men that hold into like patriarchal views or whatever, I always told them like, you guys are like the biggest buck dancers for white supremacy, in my opinion. They're the biggest ones, because for me, it's like you guys just, especially some of these black men, they're just like, you guys just want to be the white man. You just want to just take the white man out and then put yourself in and be the one that's in place and be like, yeah, we're gonna dominate. And it's just kind of like, no, that's not my mission. I want to destroy the patriarchy. I want to like eradicate it from the face of the earth. That's what I want to do.
I mean,
what you guys are doing is like a coup. That's not a destruction. You guys are doing a coup to put yourself up.
Yeah. I mean, I think every community has these actors where they don't want to deconstruct the power structure. They just want to place themselves on top instead. Yeah. I think I think every community has those actors.
Yeah, of course, 100%.
Like I don't want to name names, although I definitely could, but like that is definitely a dynamic that exists, and like that sort of gets in. But once again, that serves white supremacy because it maintains those hierarchies, regardless of whether you think you're challenging them because you're trying to place yourself at top. Like the white supremacy is built around that clattering for the top.
Yeah, especially certain. It's all. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say it's all still just a tool of whiteness as a function, and I would say, the question is queerness a white thing? It's actually the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. It's whiteness. Whiteness works to destroy queerness. Mm-hmm. Queerness is anything but whiteness.
Queerness is, or like queerness is like the distillation of, even like it's like we're talking about two spirits. The same thing with queerness. There's this great gestalt of identities that don't fit the binary as like white settler society has constructed it. And rather than maintaining all of those unique identities, they get all collapsed into queerness. I mean, part of that is just because, like, part of that's a language thing. Like, you don't want to keep adding letters.
Yeah.
Because, like, English, that's just how English works.
Yeah.
And then, like, it's like you got half the alphabet, and
Right.
that's a language problem with English. That's
Right.
just like English is being just kind of a bad language for anything abstract. Like English is a good language for like concrete physical things you can touch, but does not handle abstraction well.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I forget where I was going with this. I lost my train of thought.
I mean, for me, like I've seen like I mean, I know you said before you don't want to name names, but I don't know. For me, it's just
you are welcome to name names.
There's a couple of brothers out there that I know on the YouTube sphere that I've probably the most famous one is like what Tony Sotomayor or whatever, and yeah, he's one of them who's just it's a pattern with these guys. They just sort of like, oh, we vehemently hate black women are the worst thing. Yeah. It's like, okay, here we go. And these guys are so weird because they will, and it's so weird to see that intersection because they will put like these guys will be like, yes, you know what, black men, black women are horrible, blah 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 blah, but women of other ethnicities, go after those women because they're better, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, it's the weirdest thing you see where they just put, like, white women on a pedestal. It's like, well, the white woman is this, and then, but the black woman is the devil. And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you people? I've been around those people. There's, like, a group of guys call themselves, like, SYBM, whatever, or Savior, whatever it's called. A group of, like, some of these, like, black men who are like, oh, man, black women are the devil. We gotta, I'm like, what? It's the most cuckoo thing I've ever seen. But
I believe Malcolm X talked about this, and he also asked what the hell they were doing.
Yeah,
like you can kind of see it. I mean, obviously it's bullshit, and I don't want this. I don't want what I'm about to say to come off as apologia for that, because it's not. But given how whiteness constructs itself, I can see the logic. Because if you're going to buy into the white settler status quo, then I can see why non-white men would pursue white women as a way of gaining legitimacy through the settler state.
A status symbol.
Exactly. I'm not like the other. I'm going to use a slur, a mild slur, but still a slur. I'm not like the other savages. I'm civilized. See?
Yeah.
Like I can see how living in a white supremacist society would breed that mentality.
Yeah, and I mean, with the hyper masculinity that's kind of baked into that.
Yeah.
Ojibwe dudes, man, get it together.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing. It's a thing with Native culture. Like this is not a unique trait to the black community. You see this in Native spaces too.
Yeah, Ojibwe men, I've run into a few of you, and man, get it together. Get it together. I will send you to the creator.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's I know there's another issue which is totally understandable within certain spaces about like interracial dating. And I know this is like a big thing to discuss in a lot of like black community spaces, and I totally get it what's happening, and it's like I get because I'm currently in a relationship with someone who's like Swedish, so she's from Sweden, but I never had the point of me, thinking to myself, that black women are the greatest curse of mankind. I'm like, no, that doesn't come to my mind. It was just kind of nuts to me. But I don't know. It just it doesn't compute with me that much. But
I mean, I've dated white people. Like that's the thing. I've dated non-Z people. Like this isn't saying that like this isn't like a weird like date inside your like I mean everyone in this room understands what's being said here. I just want to clarify for the audience that this isn't a date within your own race thing. Like this is more just like the weird fetishization you get in some minority groups who chase like legitimacy through dating white women or white men in some cases.
And it's funny that you say that your partner's from Sweden. Mine is actually from Denmark. I'm dating a Danish woman.
I am currently single.
Oh,
my I run a polyamorous group. Still can't get a date.
Oh no! The ultimate irony.
I broke up with my partner at the start, about halfway through COVID, and I have just because of COVID, I've just been like, nope, I'm just going to stay at home. I'm just going to be single for a while. This is just going to be a thing.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, which is funny. This sort of brings me back to like I don't know. It's just a little thing that I remember, like with the whole land back thing, and I was just kind of like, did these guys, like, do these people, these leftists expect to think like I'm just going to be like, hey, you know what, honey, it's time. They think I'm just going to just, look at her and just be like, well, I guess you're enslaved now. And like, what? it's like I don't know. I just had that thought come to my mind because it's just like it just is so weird with the whole land back thing. It's like what? Like this is just it's like internalized like settler colonial. Yeah.
But like you can see how it happens. Like you live in a society that creates these hierarchies. You're at the bottom of these hierarchies, and if you can't, if for whatever reason, because you haven't been given the tools to imagine an alternative system, if you haven't been given tools to you can see how a minority group or a member of a minority group might be like, I want to be on top. You can see how, or at least I want legitimacy under this system. If because like unlearning colonialism is difficult. We're all still doing it. Like I have not fully unlearned it. I probably never will. But like, so it takes a lot of work to unlearn colonialism. And you can see how like people how if you're not given the tools to start that journey, you can see how that would create people like that.
I wanted to say that I don't know if anyone heard me throughout the thing, but when I was describing the whole Black manosphere, I think I was using some known ableist terms, so I don't just want to check myself on that for a minute. I think I was using certain terms, so if you guys caught me doing that, just let everyone know I was, I'm not trying to. I was just it just slips out. Not like in a way to say
I get it.
I was trying to check myself on that because I know I did say some stuff, and I was just like, wait, hold on.
I caught it. I'm typically like I know what you're referring to. I did hear it, but like I'm not. Like I said, unlearning languages are also difficult. I mean,
you checked yourself.
I will also use that word without thinking about it, and like, as an autistic person, I have frequently been the subject of it, so I really shouldn't use it. But
I mean, you caught yourself, and that's kind of the important thing. You're cognizant of it.
Yeah.
So, how are we feeling? That was amazing, y'all. I feel like I could just listen to you for hours and hours. I had a final thought, just kind of listening to you all talk. So the construct of whiteness is something I've been exploring for a few years now in the different creative projects that I've had. And it occurs to me that, or not it occurs to me, but it has occurred to me that whiteness really more than anything else, is basically a system that asks you who you'll step on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like no matter who you are, there's still always someone you could step on to be a little bit higher. And I think when we connect that to queerness, I think we can see, so this is kind of like a corresponding but separate thought. I talk a lot about how I feel that it's pretty important for us to recognize that queerness is a thing that is perhaps separate from being, say, gay, right? Like just because you're a gay person doesn't necessarily mean you're practicing queerness or that you're living like a queer experience.
Yeah,
And
well,
this can get a little messy because I never want to like take someone's label. But I think
Yeah.
I guess my point is I think what whiteness has done has been like, oh, fuck, the queers are coming. What do we do now? Right?
Well, I also,
They're coming with their rainbow flags.
I also
Yeah, and
think-
so what it's done has been like, okay, well, you white cis gays, like, who are you going to step on to get up here? And now everything's being coded as queer. Like Ellen DeGeneres might be considered queer, but like she's not queer.
Yeah.
In the sense of like queerness being this thing where you're inherently outside of this constructed system.
She's horrible to her employees. So
Question.
there's that.
Sorry,
Oh,
you go first. You go first. I'll go after.
Oh, I'm done. That was my point.
Oh, you're done. Okay.
But
I was gonna say, like, do we want to like codify queer as being against heteronormativity? Like, is that like, because like really when you look at, like, if you want to say Ellen's not queer, and I think that's a fair statement. Like Ellen very much buys into homonormativity.
Yeah, exactly.
And, like, do we want to define queer in opposition to that?
Yes. I actually pulled up a Bell Hooks quote, which rest in peace. So queer, not as being about who you're having sex with, though that can be a dimension of it, but queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it and has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. So we have, and this is kind of the general question or prompt that's out in the air. I don't want to, enforce my theories on people, but to me, queerness is an act of resistance. It is an identity that's kind of based in resistance. And what I see whiteness doing, what I see the cishet patriarchy doing right now, because it's kind of lost a bit of the battle, is that it's created this, it kind of co-opting queerness, right? To be, oh, if you have sex with people of the same gender, then you're queer. But that looks like this. That looks like you're still wealthy, you're still cis or trans, one or the other, like you were saying before. But like you don't weird people out with your lifestyle. It is replicating this kind of nuclear family, this heteronormativity or homonormativity. It's recognizable to me, right? Like I recognize what you're doing. Whereas to me, queerness is something that like people don't recognize. Queerness is the thing that stops you in the street and makes you go, oh, this is different. So anyway, sorry, that was like a awkward prompt. This is why I've been on mute the whole time. Terrible at interviewing. But I was just having this thought while you all are talking that I think it ties a lot of stuff together, is that whiteness is if it has to relinquish power, that power is always relinquished in terms of, well, who are you going to put down to get a little bit further up? And I think that that's what's happened with queerness, as we can see that we have a lot of people, like you are all saying before, is like, you have a lot of gay people now who are out and able to live their lives, but they're extremely transphobic.
Yeah.
So I think that queerness, I would agree that queerness, or the state of resistance as queerness, is, I think that the idea of being gay or being gay would fit within the queer label as a queer identity, but that would be separate from the act of being queer, the act of resistance. So, like, an Indigenous, trans person, myself, an Indigenous trans person, I live queer insofar as I actively resist the settler colonial concept of, gender binaries or, what have you, as well as racial oppression, because all of these things do end up intertwining at some point. At a certain point you have to ask the question, well, what does that resistance mean? What are you resisting? Who is resisting? What does that, or who is that person or people? And a lot of the time, I think you'll find that people that are living queer tend to be, in the majority, people of color, as opposed to, white people, because of their relationship to whiteness. Or the relationship within whiteness, I should say.
Yeah, you're certainly more likely to see like heteronormative white couple, or homonormative white couples than you are like any other group.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I guess that was my attempt to tie it into the overall question at hand, is like, is that why we have this idea that queerness is a white thing, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's being co-opted and it's being defined and it's given visibility in this very narrowly acceptable way that doesn't actually represent most queer people.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, I think of queerness as a label, and I use it, so this isn't hating on anyone who uses it. I think queerness as a label is really an attempt to, I mean, I've even already said this, I think it's an attempt to boil down a lot of like distinct identities into something palatable for a white gaze.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if you think about it, these categories had to be constructed because the opposing categories were constructed for us to either fit into or not. You know what I mean? So I feel like queerness is an attempt to define ourselves outside of categories that didn't necessarily exist before or didn't necessarily need to exist in the way that they do now. Which I think connects to what you were saying about language before. You're trying to define yourselves against words and categories that have been created by colonizers and whiteness. So you have to like figure out how to fit into that or how to define yourself against that. So it's always going to be a bit inaccurate and a bit clunky. To really, I've been using neuroqueer lately because that's like such a specific thing. And I just feel like we'll never run out of words that we need to try to encapsulate our experiences.
I have definitely used the term neuroqueer to describe myself before. This is getting away from the conversation because this is more talking about autism and queerness, but like
my favorite topic.
I as a autistic person, like part of me is concerned with that label, in that like part of me worries that eugenicists will get a hold of it, and is very fearful of what that will look like. Because already you see TERFs who dismiss trans identities based on they're not trans, they're just autistic, and then they inevitably follow autism speaks.
I think that your question, Nick, kind of gets at the heart of gender abolition. And for anyone that is unfamiliar in the chat or whatever with gender abolition, it doesn't mean nobody's going to be a man, nobody's going to be a woman. That's not what that means. That's literally not what that means. You can still be a man, you can still be a woman, you could still be, gender fluid, whatever. What gender abolition is the destruction of the dichotomy, where it's cis versus trans, straight versus gay, or whatever.
abolish
It's the destruction. Go ahead.
abolish gender roles, not gender identities.
Yeah, it's the abolition of the dichotomy between those two things. So there is no dichotomy. There is no trans necessarily label. It's just, who are you?
Yeah.
It's, are you a man? Are you a woman? Are you, outside of that?
Yeah.
Are you between those two things? That's what that means.
Yeah.
In the simplest way I can boil it down. But I think that queerness, the question of queerness and, what does it actually mean? What does it look like? I think kind of perfectly encapsulates that gender abolition, the abolition of whiteness itself, because all of the heteropatriarchy, the cisnormativity, racism, all of these things are intertwined so tight. You cannot talk about one without talking about the rest, is what I'm trying to get at. They're all intertwined, interconnected. They feed into each other. They feed off of each other. There is no separating those things. So you could just as easily say that queerness is maybe not synonymous with, but akin to or adjacent to just general indigeneity, no matter where you are on the globe, is how I would put that.
Yeah, I think that's really beautifully put. And I think for me, it's also, I think part of why I think a lot about queerness and what it means is because, something like that, like, I don't think you can really be queer in any kind of meaningful interpretation of the word and not support land back, for instance, but a lot of people on the left aren't thinking that deeply about it, right? They're just thinking about their own oppression and I don't want to call someone's oppression shallow, but I see a big problem, even with class reductionism on the left, like, it's like you're almost there, but you're not going far enough with it.
Like I'm working class. I work in a hardware store.
Yeah.
Like obviously I'm into like worker solidarity and like casting off our chains and all that, but that doesn't mean that I don't also have other unique situations based around other identities that I have.
Right.
Like, and
that capitalism, like destroying capitalism, wouldn't necessarily address those.
Absolutely not. And they're also not in conflict with each other.
Right.
Well, I mean, and a perfect example of capitalism not really being in conflict with something like race or gender or sexuality, look at Nixon's detente, black capitalism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I saw this. I saw a tweet. I don't remember who tweeted it, unfortunately. That I think really summed up. It was about specifically black capitalism, but like it can be applied to like native capitalism. It's also a thing, or any other group. Which is that like I don't know why they think black capitalism will solve black poverty, because like white poverty still exists.
Yeah.
And also, black capitalism is just a I don't know. It just feels like it feels like something that is very much, you look at it and you just say like, this is obviously a lie, right? Like this is not true in a sense. This has never been true with the black community at all, to be quite honest with you. And people, this is unfortunate because this is sort of like a default that is sort of perpetuated by a lot of especially like black celebrities in a way, where they do this whole thing, well, you guys need to do this and we make money and blah 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 blah. And even what's his name, I forgot his name. Wow, okay, I'm already blanking on him, but it was when like the Black Lives Matter protesting were happening with the George Floyd uprisings, and I think this rapper came out and said, "Oh, don't burn down black businesses."
I I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's just kind of like
Killer Mike, right?
Yeah, Killer Mike. Yeah, how did I forget? Yeah, Killer Mike. And I was just like, that's not helping us, dude. You know, it's like it hasn't helped us.
Not helpful.
And it's so annoying. It's a very and I think that sort of plays into it too, where it's like it's the same thing with like queerness too, where you see like even capitalism is trying to sort of co-opt it in a way, presenting this sort of thing where it's like, hey, there's nothing wrong, just be rich and whatever. And in terms of like media representation too, it's just kind of like, okay, this is all I'm seeing in like these reality TV shows are the same, maybe like privileged white LGBT people. I mean, it plays into a lot of things, and for me it's like it's not like the full experience, and it just doesn't like it sort of interconnects in a way. So it just plays off of each other. And it's just like especially this idea of like capitalism is somehow going to save myself from the systematic poverty and oppression that Black people have been dealing with for about a long time. And it's like somehow this is going to save us. Like, really?
Yeah.
It's like first off, this system was designed for a specific group of people that don't look like me, so it was made to benefit for them. So it's just weird, it's just like
And like even if like a different group other than white people did become like even if we did supplant white people and someone else becomes the top dog in the capitalist hierarchy, that doesn't deal with all of the oppressions that that capitalism is built on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are so many problems that are created by capitalists which are fundamentally oppressive, that like this idea that like if natives become top dog in capitalism, or if like X group becomes top dog in capitalism, like those systemic oppressions just get shifted to someone else. They don't solve the injustice.
Yeah. And I mean, I am so disappointed, and this is more of like a Cherokee Nation issue, but I'm so disappointed. There's a good example of that is, post Trail of Tears, post, Emancipation Proclamation, once people were actually released from slavery, the Cherokee Nation, the elders drew up, a constitution that basically laid out like, yes, freedmen are welcome to get citizenship here. They will be considered full citizens. They vote with us, the whole shebang.
Mm-hmm.
Well, lately there's been an argument within the nation over whether or not the freedmen are legitimate citizens, whether they should have their citizenship repealed.
Yeah, there's like some blood quantum arguments going on, like that. Like, yes, they're citizens, but they can't vote because they don't have the right blood quantum. Like,
right.
I have been following the story.
Yeah, and it's like our elders already laid down the ground rules for this, that blood quantum did not apply because they were freedmen. They were welcome to get citizenship and vote with us. This should not be an issue. This is very clearly, very blatantly, very transparently just some bougie natives wanting to pocket as much money as they can for their own benefit, not to help any of the citizens, whether they're, Afro natives, whether they're non-Afro natives, it doesn't matter. They're just doing this to pocket more money for their own benefit.
Yeah. Sorry, I just had to decline a call.
No,
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, this is as I understand it, and I'm not like part of what the quote unquote 5 civilized tribes. I don't like that term. But those were for once again, for viewers who don't know the history here, the 5 civilized tribes were the 5 tribes that owned. So most native nations did not own slaves. This is like I've heard some talk that like native people own slaves. True, but like in a limited capacity. Most native nations did not own slaves. There were 5 tribes, the Cherokee among them, that did. And those are called the civilized tribes because they bought slaves.
Oh dear.
White people could sell slaves to them, so they got to be the civilized tribes.
The Cherokee Nation has a very complex history.
Yeah. And like I'm not Cherokee. I'm not even from that region. Like the Métis, we're like Canada and like northern U.S. Like
yeah,
like you don't really find us below North Dakota. But as I understand it, this is a problem going through all 5 of the 5 civilized tribes.
yeah. It's just the Cherokee are being more spoken about because we're considered one of the larger, more dominant tribes out there. But it's a shit show, and obviously, it's regrettable. It's disgusting that we even have that as part of our history, but it's part of our history. It's a dark part of our history. There's a lot of dark parts, and we have it's complicated to say the least. Like when you're talking about tribes that practiced slavery, it's a complicated history. It's very complex.
Or I can say the same thing about like in Africa too. Like there's this sort of, but it's kind of like the opposite. There's this tendency where people say like, because you see this all the time. A lot of like white conservatives would do this. That's what they say, like, well, we didn't really enslave the Africans. It was basically you guys enslaved yourselves and sold you to us. And it's like, wow, that's a massive reduction in understanding what's really happening here in terms of like the dynamic, because there was a thing in Africa called like debt slavery, which was a common occurrence. Not all cultures had it, but yeah, this was common in like West Africa, where if someone would owe the debt or someone from like the tribe or something, that person would be a slave for X number of years. Now, granted, I'm not saying this is a good thing to have, but that was their system of operating. Like if you did, like they mostly would reserve it for like people who would commit like criminal actions or things of that nature. Mm-hmm. But if it was framed mostly like if you owe, it was mostly you owe something to someone and you can't really do this, so you kind of do this sort of debt slavery, which was very like common. And
yeah, there's a difference between like historical practice slavery, because I mean, and like chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is a very unique historical phenomenon that really only affected Black people. Like the everyone had slavery is such a dishonest argument, because like there were more native nations than just the 5 civilized tribes that practiced a form of slavery. Just those were the 5 that practiced chattel slavery. And it was similar and I don't know how much of that is white people applying slavery, because I know that there's a history of like adopting combatants into a nation after the combat's over, and that was never a Métis practice. I can't comment too much on it, but I wonder how much of what was labeled slavery was just that, and how much of it was actual slavery. So we're getting outside my wheelhouse, so I don't want to speak on it.
For the Cherokee, we did. So yes, we had chattel slavery, obviously. Some of that was a sort of front. And I'm not making excuses for this. I'm just trying to give a little bit of context for that history, at least within the Cherokee. So while we had chattel slavery, some of those people were, it was a lot more, and I wish I could remember the name of the nation in Africa, where it was a lot more like indentured servitude, where it's a form of slavery, but you're not like, it's not the same as the slavery of the plantation owners.
Yeah.
It was, you know, a lot of the time you could be adopted into that family or just adopted into the nation in general.
My understanding of natives nations that practice slavery, that was usually how it went. Is that you would you would eventually be adopted into the community, and it was sort of like a temporary state. That was my understanding of how it worked. But like, this was never a Metsi practice, so my understanding is a little iffy.
Yeah,
in
it's
the case of like in certain like West Africa, or you know, because most of these West Africa, that's where most of the slaves in the Atlantic trade came from that region. So it's, they practice that, but the thing is, they expected those people were going to come back. It's not like when they put them on the ships, it's not like these people were just signing them off and they're just like, oh, they're not going to come back.
Yeah.
You know, they expected them to come back. They were expecting them because they assumed that the Europeans were following the same logic of their thinking. That this is what was happening. But that's not what was happening. These people were basically being kidnapped and they weren't coming back. This is why later on they started doing, you know, the Europeans started basically just straight up kidnapping people.
Yeah.
Because
like all that.
You know, yeah, because a lot of the tribes people were just like, whoa, our people that we sent like a month ago, they never came back after like 5 years, you know? So we're not going to give you anymore. Like, we're not going to do this. And that's when they started deciding we're just going to use the tactic of just kidnapping people. Basically, yeah, essentially. So, yeah, this is why I hate that sort of argument, because it's an attempt to like diminish the Atlantic slave trade, to basically, when people say, well, everyone had slave, it's an attempt to basically be dishonest and basically say like, well, the Atlantic slave trade wasn't as bad. It's apologizing for the Atlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
And a lot of, you know, these, oh my God, a lot of people use that every time. Even Candace Owens, oh my God, her. She even used that argument.
Oh, buddy.
Like one of the Prager whatever videos, and I'm like, this is like, we're using this argument now, and yeah, it's that weird thing where it's just not. Or this is a very common thing, especially like after 9/11.
Yeah,
all of a sudden people discovered that there was an Arab slave trade, just magically. After you know, of course, to be, you know, to go after, you know, Muslim people, because it was post 9/11. So you started seeing arguments, people saying, well, look at the Arab slave trade, look what happened. And it's like, yeah, it was bad, we know that. Like, what is your argument here that you're trying to make? You know, like you're just trying to are we doing this weird thing where you're just basically you're really trying hard to, you know, wash the hands of the European version of it. You know, you're really trying hard and present like, so it's. Yeah, I
mean, you see this going away from slavery, but you see this argument with natives a lot too. If like we talk about genocide, it's like, well, you weren't saints either. It's like, yeah, we weren't. Like, we had war. Some of it wasn't great. Like the Metsi went to war with like the Sioux. Although I recently was told Sioux was a slur, so I should maybe drop that word from my vocabulary. But either way, and like that was a thing that happened. Like there was historical conflict. That doesn't mean we deserve to be wiped out. Have you looked at European history recently?
It turns out Indigenous people are complicated. We are still full people. I know that might be wild for some people, but I mean, the Cherokee, we weren't the nicest people. How do you think we became the Cherokee Nation down in the American Southeast? We were like, I don't like the way that the Haudenosaunee people are taking the nation, so we're just going to bounce the fuck out. We're going to migrate south, and we're just going to take this land from these people that were already here.
Oh, there's a bit of history I didn't know.
Yeah, we're complicated. It turns out.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
no one's saying that like Native people were perfect little angels, but the fact that we also have a complicated and occasionally violent history does not justify genocide.
Yeah.
Exactly. It doesn't justify people being murdered. It's kind of, it's weird. It's not weird, but we know why they do it. But yeah.
It's purely post hoc justification.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember while we're like discussing complex history, it's important when you're talking about a group of people to not call them savages, but also not to overcorrect and call them a noble savage.
Yeah.
Don't overcorrect in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
People are complicated.
Like, and we can acknowledge the dark history of colonized people without justifying colonialism.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That's these facts aren't in conflict. White people want to treat them like they are, because white people want that post hoc justification of being like, well, you weren't great, so you deserved it. It's just it's bullshit. It's bullshit.
Spot on Irish.
Or, the history of like the US, where this is interesting, where you had these sort of, when the US started deciding they're going to do imperialism, right? And, the British Empire and all the other European empires sort of followed the doctrine of like the white man's burden. So it's like, oh, we're going to spread civilization, everybody. Whereas you had this weird thing in the US where the sort of white Protestant Anglo super white man, whatever they want to call themselves, they would be like, you had Teddy Roosevelt being like, oh, we got to do what the Europeans are doing. We got to do like the white man's burden. And you have folks in his government that were like, we shouldn't get involved in Cuba. And, people, it's funny because every time people bring up isolationism in the US, people don't seem to understand the racist history of what isolationism actually mean in the US. Because when they said isolationism, they're mostly talking about Anglo-Saxon blood purity. It was this weird thing where they're like, we're not going to go to Cuba. Why are we going to colonize Cuba? Cuba is filled with these people who are brown, and we don't want to, basically dilute our pure white Protestant bloodline. And then you have like the other races, like the Woodrow Wilsons of the world, who are like, no, we got to do the white man's burden. It's this crazy thing that was going on in the US in terms of like imperialism, where when we were just jumping off point to imperialism, we're just like, oh, let's do what the Europeans are doing. Let's spread civilization and then do that in the Philippines, things of that nature. And it's just like, and you have these sort of nativist folks who were just like, no, we don't want to dilute our blood purity. It's like, it's pretty, and it's funny because it's a hypocrisy for those people, because when you bring up indigenous people, that's when it's like, yeah, hoorah, the Trail of Tears was justified. What? They just
yeah. It's such a weird logical leap.
You see that with Tucker Carlson too on Fox News. Like, I remember this one panel he's talking about. He's all about immigration is bad, and then I remember when someone brought up, hey, what happened? That was kind of wrong what Andrew Jackson did, and it's just like he literally had nothing to say at that point, because it's just like, man, I don't want to say what I want to say, but I can't really say it, because if I say it, then it's gonna kind of reveal what I actually believe.
Yeah. And I think that it's such a weird thing too, because I've seen, and like the Liz Warren types where, oh, I'm Cherokee. Like, no, you're fucking not. You might be indigenous, but 9 out of 10 times you're not related to some Cherokee princess that never existed, because we didn't have princesses.
Yeah. Well, this is a uniquely Canadian issue with the Métis is we have. So I'm not generally in the business of policing people's identities. If you say you're Métis, I'm just gonna believe you.
Hmm.
But we do have this big problem in the eastern provinces with people who have no connection to the Great Plains, no connection to the Métis nations, claiming Métis status because for land claim purposes, because they have like Mi'kmaq ancestry going back 100, 200 years. Like, and so there's this understanding in parts of Canada that like Métis means just mixed white native and not like a distinct unique population that had its own separate government and army and language. So you get like a lot of settlers, especially in the east, who claim Métis because they don't know they don't know who we are, and they just think that we're just any random mixed native white settler group, which is really frustrating to deal with.
Yeah, it is. Well, and it's such a strange phenomenon. Well, and I shouldn't call it a phenomenon, but like it is such a strange thing because actual Indigenous people, we're assumed to be extinct. We're this unicorn that doesn't. We're like the dinosaurs. We died with the dinosaurs, right?
In
But
Canada, at least, like there's a big enough Indigenous political bloc that we don't get that as much.
Might be an American thing then.
I mean, I won't say we don't see it because we definitely do, but it doesn't seem to be as bad here as it does in the US. At least not that one, because like we have multiple standoffs going on. Like people remember, like we have Wet'suwet'en happening right now, where there's an Indigenous blockade defending going against the. It's the RCMP, I think. I don't think it's BC doesn't have their own police force. It's got to be the RCMP defending against the RCMP. And then we had like Mi'kmaq treaty rights, a big Mi'kmaq treaty rights, where like Mi'kmaq fisheries were like, no, you have the right to fish out of season. And like settlers were like burning people's boats down, over fishing rights. Yeah. And then like we had 1492 Land Back Lane in Ontario, like blocking land developers for building real estate around a res, because there's a res that they're just like they want to develop all around it, and the res is like, where are we going to go? Like, where are we going to grow out to? You're going to ghettoize us. We can't have this. They won. They unilaterally won, which is awesome. Right. But so like in Canada, at least, we're allowed enough. I think this has to do with Canada just not being as populous as the US. So we're allowed enough political bloc that it's hard to make an argument that we're gone.
Yeah, in the US, I mean, we were gone with the dinosaurs. Like it's always such a surprise or a shock to people when they meet a native person and they're like, oh, what? You guys still exist? But at the same time, like in the same breath, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, my great grandma was a Cherokee princess."
Yeah,
like no, she wasn't. She was probably from a potato farm in Germany.
Or I'm descended from Pocahontas.
Yeah. Pocahontas.
I've heard that one multiple times.
Can anyone hear me here now or no?
Yep, you're coming in clear.
Yeah,
you were coming garbled for a bit. Like I was still able to understand what you're saying. It was just very not clear.
Just kind of choppy.
Yeah, but you're coming through perfectly now.
Yeah. Okay, good. Because I don't know if you can hear in the background, but my dad's here and he's just blasting Haitian music, so I don't know if you can hear it.
Someone's got some bumping tunes.
I can hear music off in the background, but not so much that it's like disruptive.
Oh, okay, good. Because he's really Sunday, so he came to see me, so he's just kind of like, I'm just gonna bump music, yeah. I'm sorry, I just lost the train of thought just a minute ago. I'm sorry. I was about to say something. You guys can continue talking. I just lost what I was going to say.
It'll come back to you.
Well, while you're thinking, we did have a comment from Paper Light Boy, and I think I forgot to tell you all that you can see the comments.
Yeah, I've been checking.
Okay.
I
never look at the comments. Oh my god.
I get weird legs when I try to look at the comments and do stream at the same time, so I don't tend to try.
And I know for some people it's really distracting too, so it just depends. But Paper Boy brought up manifest destiny as a preceding concept to Lebensraum. I hope I'm saying that right. And this was kind of in connection to something y'all were talking about a little bit ago, but the goal of Manifest Destiny was to clear the land of natives to create a living space for white settlers. And living space is a direct translation of Lebensraum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
there's sorry, you go first.
All right. Well, real quick, what I was going to say is if you read an Indigenous People's History of the United States, again, by Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, if anyone is interested, she does actually talk about that. And this idea of untouched land, well, it wasn't untouched. It was just natives had been cleared out so thoroughly. We've been cleared out so thoroughly, and such a long time had passed between, our settlements being in the area and anyone cultivating that land, that it, the old adage, let the forest reclaim the land. That's essentially what happened, is the fauna and the flora came back to its natural state. So people thought, oh, nobody lived here. It's virgin, unspoiled land. When no, it was probably hunted on or worked, agriculture or, ranching. And yes, we did have animal husbandry. We had it around the same exact time as Europe figured it out. We're not dumb. We understood how to keep animals. We also understood how to grow crops. We knew that. We knew all that. Oh, go ahead, Green. What were you going to say?
I was going to cite the quote that fascism is when violence that is imperialist. Fascism is when the violence that the imperialist nations have visited upon the world over the course of development of modern parasitic capitalist world systems comes back home to visit.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Noizangle
I'm trying to source that quote. It is from Fascism and Anti-Fascism, a Decolonial Perspective. And who wrote it? It looks like it's a Mohawk. It looks like whoever wrote it is Mohawk. Kise Kanea. I'm sure I'm saying that horribly wrong, and I apologize.
Noisy just said there's been a lot of ideological and media work to make that whole idea of lost Indigenous peoples happen from the beginning of film, pretty much. And I know, I think we were talking about Star Trek before, but rewatching The Next Generation, it's unbelievable to me, like how much anti-Indigenous sentiment there is in that very specific. First of all, where no one's gone before, and it's like, but you keep encountering people.
Yeah.
So like, people have gone there. And then secondly, there's just so much, like even in the episode, I think 3 or 4 is like the racist one that everyone hates.
Absolutely. Yep. I know exactly.
And what struck me was
about.
that it's a cast of Black characters, so you think it's anti-Black, and it is, but it actually struck me as much more anti-Indigenous than very specifically than anything else. So yeah, you have even media that's purporting to be kind of more leftist and more progressive still falls into these tropes all the time of just erasing Indigenous people.
Yeah. So going to Star Trek, I also, for those who don't know, I do a Star Trek stream. It's supposed to be every other week. We've been really behind because my co-host is busy with school. But the Indigenous consultant that was hired to work on The Next Generation and on Voyager was complete fraud. It was just some white dude who made all of it up. Which is why, I know I have a really hard time watching Voyager. It's the only Star Trek I have not seen to completion. Just because all of the Chakotay stuff is fucking nonsense. And like in the worst, most racist way. Also,
watch that episode. Yeah,
Janeway is just cool with working with slavers at one point, and like, what?
I mean, it's a trope that happens in like sci-fi where it's just like, even like I remember watching Avatar and I'm just like, oh, we're doing a noble savage, but with aliens, okay.
Oh, I fucking hated that movie. Oh my god, I fucking hated it.
That's basically what it was. It was just like, it's basically like the noble savage, and I'm like, okay,
it's Dancing with Wolves, but with blue aliens.
And the horror of like the white guy, the colonizer, going into a native body, and like literally taking over. It just
it's like. It's
not like
you're. It's like a weird form of like. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's red face. It's red face.
Yeah.
I was going to blackface, but it doesn't have that same historical but it's red face.
Yeah,
it's a
form of Indian.
Yeah.
This is why you need other writers. Yeah. This is why you need diverse writers, folks, because they could actually catch that.
Weird.
And
so James Cameron's from a city up in far northern Ontario, and I've been there. It's like largely native.
Really?
I don't know how he didn't know not to do this.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's just kind of like like this is. I mean, this is. I've always said this. Like this is the problem. Like we're just gonna have a white dude's perspective and just write these stories. And it's like, no, because if you had other people of color who wrote these stories, they would catch some of the nonsense, and they would be like, "Wait, why are we doing this?"
Just hire a consultant.
Exactly.
Like I work.
Yeah, but white people don't want to be told that they're not doing the good thing. You know,
right?
That's the problem. It's
no,
but there's such a beautiful race. Like it's a compliment. It's like, no, you're not doing what you think you're doing.
Yeah,
you're actually doing a racism.
It's infantilizing.
If there are any Hollywood directors, I do consultation work. Hit me up on Twitter if you need it.
Rule number 1: don't do an anti-Indigenous. That's bad.
Yeah.
Well, and what's strange is, and the Assassin's Creed Ubisoft is a garbage company, but the third Assassin's Creed with Connor, I'm not going to try to pronounce his Mohawk name.
Rateho Kanedon, I believe. I'm replaying it now. So
yeah, that they actually brought in 2 Mohawk consultants, people that spoke the language. All of the dialogue lines are actual Mohawk, that particular dialect of it. And I think that honestly, in the third game, I did like it. I thought that it was a fair.
It got way more hate than it deserved. No, listen. When he threatens to murder George Washington,
right,
it chills down my spine.
Oh yeah,
Like,
and it didn't, and it never tried to play up like the noble savage or the barbaric, savage, the violent savage. It never tried to play those things up. And there's one particular line in there when Connor is standing in the doorway of Achilles' house, and the messenger comes up for Samuel Adams, and he's like, Sam is requesting your help. He needs your help. And Connor looks at him and goes, the colonists make the mistake of thinking that I'm one of theirs. I fight for my own people. Like, I thought that was such an impactful line, where it's like Connor's not fighting for the colonists necessarily. He's just fighting against the crown because he thinks that's what's going to help him.
I also do love. I wish they touched on it more, but I love that they touched on it at all. That the fact that the Mohawk sided with the crown.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that they addressed that Connor at one point has to fight his own people because that's how history played out.
Yeah. And there were shots in the game during the missions where you would have people from your own village that were fighting for the crown and people that were fighting on your side. The the nation was split.
Yeah.
That is historically accurate.
Well, in terms of like Ubisoft being a garbage company, I agree 1,000%. But apart from that point, I do like the fact that when I played Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I think I played Origins, I was happy with the fact that they portrayed the actual skin tone of the ancient Egyptians correctly. I was like, okay, this is how they're supposed to look like.
I am a colossal Assassin's Creed junkie. Like, this is my Assassin's Creed hoodie.
Nice. Nice.
It's my favorite video game franchise. I have not played the Viking one because Ubisoft is so shit.
Yeah.
I have, despite having bought the collector's editions of almost every Assassin's Creed game, despite being a huge, long-time fan of the franchise, I have not bought the Viking one because I will not support like Ubisoft, or at least like I'll probably pick it up eventually at a steep discount.
Yeah,
but like as of this moment, I have not played it.
Yeah, and I
having
like yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, having studied like European spirituality, and that includes Northern Europe, Scandinavia, I will not play the Viking game because just the idea that they're implying Viking as a distinct set of people is bonkers, because Viking is a verb. Yeah. It is a job title.
It means like raider, right? Something along those lines?
Yeah, someone that goes a Viking is just a raider or an explorer, just someone that goes out and does things. It was a job title.
Yeah.
And I've studied runes. I've studied all of the I used to be a pagan, a continental European pagan. That used to be my religion. Now I'm more into indigenous spirituality. Mm-hmm. But having studied all of that, the use of runes always irks me, because as much as everyone wants to argue, runes actually were not used for divination. Spinning wheels were. That's how they did divination.
Yeah,
runes were writing. What?
Weren't runes just the alphabet?
Yes, runes were literally just an alphabet.
Yeah. So, I mean, as for you being pagan, I used to be a Satanist. We all have our weird journeys.
We all have our weird journeys. Levian or spiritualist or theistic?
No, Levian.
Okay.
Because for me, like, I remember when I played, I was kind of happy, like, when I played Odyssey, and I was just like, wow, they actually portrayed the Greeks to their actual skin tone. Thank God. Yeah. You know? they didn't look all like...
Cassandra is dark skin.
What? Yeah. And even, like, they made Cleopatra look pretty accurate to how she's supposed to look. So I was just of course she would look like that, because she's a...
I have some issues on how they wrote her, but how they got her look was dead on.
Yeah, how they got her look, because her writing was a little, but you know, her writing was a little because it's kind of the same old, it's that same old trope of like, I'm a femme fatale, and I'm you know, it felt kind of weird.
She gets better. She gets better towards the end of the game, but how they introduce her being like, I promised anyone that if they slept with me, or anyone they could sleep with me, but I get to kill them at the end of the day. I'm just like, that is definitely not something Cleopatra would have done.
Not to say that ancient Egyptians weren't horny. I mean, they were very horny people, but it's you know, it's just they wouldn't do it like that. You know,
so that was a little tropey. But I admire, like, and I've read some Black critiques, some African critiques of like how Assassin's Creed Origin portrays non-Egyptian Africans.
Yeah, I didn't like that too either. Yeah.
So like, it's not perfect, but I really liked it. I liked my time with the game. There's native people in Europe in Ragnarok, as I understand it. I don't know who consulted on that, if anyone consulted on that, or I don't know if maybe I'm misreading it, and perhaps Eivor, I believe is the character's name, goes to Canada at some point. But I want to know what's up with that, and I will find out when I eventually play that game. But it might be a bit.
I can give kudos to them having native characters in Europe, because obviously, we understood sailing.
Yeah.
Go to Poverty Point down in Florida.
Yeah.
They dug up a fleet
Yeah.
of Seminole trade canoes.
Also,
I mean, we were trading internationally, so of course we were.
Also-
some of us were studying abroad.
Also, there was the northern trade through like Inuit territory into like Sami and all of the north.
Yeah.
Like you didn't need the idea that you needed large barges to travel from Europe to America is wrong.
Yeah.
In the book 1491, which I highly recommend everyone read. It's got some wrong stuff. It's a bit dated. It was written when it was written. Academics still considered the Clovis hypothesis a possibility, and that has since been debunked. But if you can ignore sort of the more dated stuff, the book 1491 even implies that natives. Well, it doesn't imply. It says it. It says it in passing that natives had trade with England prior to Columbus. Yeah, because it was just with poor fishermen, so it wasn't noteworthy to the crown. So poor fishermen would come over, trade with natives on the shore, and then they'd go back to England. And there was no. It wasn't until Columbus that like discovered that colonialism happened. So there's ample. There's also an African king, Mensa Misa.
I think Mansa Musa. I think I forgot
That's
his
the
name.
one. Thank you. My apologies for mispronouncing it. There's evidence to suggest that he made contact with native people 300 years prior to Columbus.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's graves that are dug up in like Scandinavia, and they find like hemp seeds or like hemp products. You can't grow hemp it's just too cold up there.
Well, and we know that Leif Erikson made contact like that. Even settlers
right.
That.
Well, and even before Leif Erikson, landed on the East Coast. I mean, the Cherokee and Chickasha and Muskogee and Osage people, or I think Osage is the exonym, but all of the people in that area and the Seminole, I'm just saying we had primo weed. We had primo weed, and we were lit AF. People were coming and buying our weed and our tobacco. We were literally world famous. That part of the United States, those areas were world famous for our tobacco and hemp and weed, because that's what we had, and corn, of course. But yeah.
So yeah, either way, like the world wasn't nearly as isolated as settler colonial narratives want to suggest.
Of course,
and just like the myth of the land bridge, the idea that like natives came from Russia over the land bridge, and that has been debunked. Like I don't think there was any one period where natives like there's this myth that like, oh, when did natives get there? Well, we've been here a long time, but I don't think there's any one time we came either. Mm-hmm. Like there has been a constant exchange of population throughout all of human history between the Americas and the rest of the world.
Yeah. Like, well, and I know the study you're talking
and the land bridge
about
might have been part of that. Like,
yeah,
but that's not the single origin of it.
Excuse me. Well, so I know the study that you're talking about. Basically, in the study itself goes out of its way, and a lot of like white supremacists want to use this study as their claim that indigenous people weren't here first. What they're talking about is what they're talking about is it was a proto-Siberian population, because before Siberia became a country, became a recognized population of people. The theory goes, these proto-Siberians walked across a land bridge to what is today considered Alaska and the western part of the Canadian territories. And what they think happened, because there is some evidence that they were there. but not in great force. It was maybe just a few families, and they didn't really get past like what is today the like southern Canadian border. They didn't move much past that, and what we think happened is either they died when they got there because there's not a lot of evidence that they stuck around for very long. Like the tools were kind of outdated for the area because they moved, it took them a while to get there. So those tools were kind of outdated. And there just wasn't much there weren't very many cultural touchstones. There wasn't a lot of artwork from them or a lot of pottery or fashion or anything like that. They didn't have much of an influence on the culture already existing in the area. So we think they either died or just melded in with the population that already existed there. That's what probably happened.
So I'm now looking at the comments, even though I said I generally don't. I just want to call out that Paper Light Boy commented that Russia colonized Siberia, which is absolutely true.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. They did colonize Siberia. Yeah.
No, yeah, 100%. I mean, they're still doing it, really. It's Siberia isn't fully colonized yet. They're working on it.
Yeah.
I know, for example, like what you said before with that, like, white supremacists basically trying to pull a, we were here already, so thus we have justification. Well, they do the same thing all the time. Like I think the oldest thing like the Brits did in India was basically say like, oh, we descend from the Aryan, Vedic people. It means light-skinned invader, you see? And it's like, no, that's not what it meant. So you guys probably don't even understand what Sanskrit is. So what the hell? And then they're saying like, no, this is what it is. And it's like, you do know there were Dravidians here, right? And then this whole weird thing, especially in India, when it comes to this, like, especially like with the British, in terms of like trying to basically make this sort of divide and conquer distinction between like, oh, the dark Dravidians were from a more primitive culture compared to the, Vedic people, and it's like, what? And it's weird. It's like this really, they did this all the time because they didn't understand what was going on, and it's just like, they read the Vedas and they're just like, oh, this must be the true. This is where we actually came from, and it's like, what? Like, no, you didn't guys come from there. Like, I mean, you guys are white British people. Like, dude, you're not from India. Like, you're. I mean, hey, you could maybe say you're a Pict or a Saxon, but bro, no, you're not. You're not a Vedic Indian. Like, come on.
I mean, but I'm not even sure they can say that because I mean, they might very well be descended from Picts or Saxons. But that doesn't mean they are. Like technically, so 3 of my 4 grandparents are Métis. The one who's not is British. That doesn't make me British.
Right. Well, and even the idea that, the Aryan, like, okay, but like, have you considered, like, let's grant for a second that word meant light-skinned. Light-skinned, fairer compared to the rest of the population. Yeah. That doesn't automatically mean, glows in the dark white. That doesn't mean the same thing.
And I mean, also you get into like how whiteness is constructed and how like whiteness, at least at first, wasn't a skin color because there were light-skinned people who weren't considered white.
Or they play this game where they say, well, if Aryan means a noble person, and Iran means land of the Aryans, and I'm like, wait, so you kind of just told on yourself. You're saying like the Iranians are noble people, and it's like, what? And then it's very funny when it comes to that whole situation.
Part of how whiteness works, and part of how fascism works. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just part of how it works is the idea that like you create an in group, and so this is why like Irish people and like some Métis people and some groups who get to be white is you create a power base. So you create enough of a population to qualify. And that's how and then use that to establish dominance, and then you shrink that group, right? To consolidate power among a smaller group. So like, and who gets to be in that smaller group may like when fascism last had a major rise, it was the Germans, and the Germans were like, we get to determine whiteness and superiority. It might be something different now, because it's not necessarily to go. But the idea is that like there are people who are conditionally white now. I would probably include myself in this. Who once that circle starts shrinking, won't be anymore. Because that's how the power consolidation under settler colonialism works.
Yeah.
Right now they need a large power base, so they have to be very inclusive of who is considered white. But once that power base is consolidated, then they can start shrinking it, and they will. This is like we know they will, because this has happened multiple times throughout history.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why you got some weird. That's why I see some white nationalists claiming like, if they're like someone who's darker, they say like, "Oh, they're actually dark Caucasians." It's like, okay,
yeah,
all right, bro. Now we're going there now. You know,
it's why you'll see like I had a Twitter thread on this recently. There's a big coalition. I mean, not big. There is a coalition between white supremacists and Hindu nationalists in Toronto right now. And really throughout all of Southern Ontario. And it's why you can see that, like, because they need that power base, so they will accept these Hindu nationalists who are dark skinned and clearly not white, because they need that power base. The second they have that foothold, they're out the door.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna make a Tulsi joke, but never mind. I was gonna make a Tulsi Gabbard joke and be like, "Oh, is she there too?" But
real quick, yeah. I actually am gonna have to jump out of this call.
Yeah, we've gone twice as long as we originally planned.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we did. Oh my god.
Do you have time to? Are you all ready to wrap up? How are we feeling?
I mean, yeah. I mean, for me, yeah, because I think I am getting a little hungry and I smell some food. So yeah.
Yeah, all I've had to eat today is a box of macaroni and cheese, so I should also get food.
Yeah, it's about dinner time for me as well.
I woke up and then instantly ran a TTRPG game and then came here.
Yeah, that's a long day.
Yeah,
I don't know if you find this too, especially as an autistic. Like, I get super drained by online stuff, even though it's my favorite thing to do. I don't know if you're that way as well, but that's a big day.
No, I tend not to be, but I've been on screen since 11 a.m. So,
Whew. Well, all right. Well, I want to thank you all for being here today. This was an awesome conversation, and I would love to have any and all of you back on either this platform or my other platform, Pink Spots, anytime you want. Open invitation. So why don't you all tell everyone where they can find you and point to, either where they can send you some money to support you for your work today, or where you would like them to donate instead.
Yeah. Obviously, Sean, Yana, you can find me on Twitch. I'm on a hiatus for the rest of December until January between work and the holiday. But starting January, I will be back on Twitch with my co-host at Anarchist Laboratory. You can find me there, where I usually talk about white people doing white shit. And also we cover news and science. I'm kind of a biology dork. I love evolution. That's my one niche interest. You can also find me on Twitter, Yonv. That's YONVBEAR. For anyone that speaks any amount of Cherokee, I literally named myself Bear on there.
Oh, cute.
Yeah.
I love that. And I should have said this before, but all of their links are already in the description below, so you can click on those to follow everyone. So, well, thank you, Yana.
Yep.
KingJon, where can people find you?
I got a YouTube channel where I usually just rant in my car. That's what I'm doing right now. But it's mostly just me venting some things that are going on around.
What's your channel? I don't have it. I don't think I knew that somehow.
KingJon, I think. I don't know what it's. I'm trying to think. I really think that's what it is.
Okay.
But yeah, and then I got to GoFundMe, guys. So trying to get a lawyer here to go to war with unemployment. So I'm not going to war with unemployment, but yeah, I got that.
Oh yes, I
got
also
that.
have a Venmo. It's Cosmic Sean. If anyone wants to send me some monies, Cosmic Sean.
Yeah. And I think you have my thing in the link, right? I totally forgot if you have it.
I have your GoFundMe and I have your Twitter.
Okay, good. And yeah, in my Twitter, just so people understand, I single boost a lot of sex workers. So if you guys got a problem with that, I mean, what is it? Not safe for work. I get it, guys. Just don't follow me if that's the case, because I do signal boost a lot.
Sex workers.
So, and I've been working with Red Canary Song and stuff sometimes. So the decrime stuff in New York City. So
nice.
Yeah, that's kind of where you can find me, my channel, and yeah.
Great. And Green?
So you can see my Twitter right here, a neon green city. You can also find me on Instagram at A Cure for Sleep. Although I'm not that active on Instagram, I mostly put up urban wildlife photography whenever I happen to find it. So I'll be gone for months and months at a time, and then there'll be like 50 photos in one day. I do also do, like I said, I do a Star Trek stream with a friend of mine, but it's on her channel, which is Noizangle. We're currently on hiatus because she's bogged down with school. Also, I do have a podcast coming in the near future. It's an actual play podcast of the Alien, the movie franchise, RPG, with several prominent leftist YouTubers, including Mexi and Tristan from Step Back History.
That sounds cool. Okay, the Alien. Okay, I didn't know it was an RPG.
It's fairly new. It only came about like 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And I do not have a Venmo or anything. I work full time and I make enough money to pay my bills quite comfortably. But if people would like to donate money towards me for any labor here or on Twitter or anywhere, I would ask to instead donate that money to the Wet'suwet'en Resistance. And you can do so at yintaaccess.com.
Great. Yeah, and again, those links are in the description, or they will be very soon. Sorry, I just had music in my ear. I was like, where's that coming from? Yeah, so thank you all for coming today. I had a great time. I saw a lot of comments saying that the stream was awesome and people learned a lot. So I just really appreciate everyone's time and intellect in you sharing that with me. So I want to say goodbye to everyone. We don't have the next stream planned yet, but we will see you in about a month.